The alarm never woke Ethan Walker. He was always up before it, 5 o'clock, every morning, without exception. He'd learned years ago that the quietest part of the day, that thick wool-dark hour before the house stirred, belonged to him in a way nothing else did. Not because he was hiding from his family, because this was the only hour when the rest of the world was slow enough for him to think clearly. He moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light, navigating by habit and the faint blue glow of the microwave clock. He filled a pot with water, set it on the burner, measured coffee grounds by feel. Then he stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard where the oak tree Olivia had wanted removed for 3 years. Still stood enormous and indifferent, catching the first gray light. He was 40 years old. His face had begun to collect the small evidence of that fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a jaw that held a little more weight than it had at 30. But his posture was still straight, his hands still steady, and when he was concentrating on something, there was a quality to his focus that made younger people in rooms full of people occasionally stop talking and wonder about him. Nobody in his neighborhood would have guessed what he did for a living. That was partly by design. By 6:15, Ethan had made Sophie's lunch turkey and provolone no mustard, an apple sliced so it wouldn't brown, a small note tucked inside the bag. The way he'd been doing since she was 7 and was standing at the bottom of the stairs calling her name. With the practiced patience of a man who understood that 14-year-olds lived in a different time zone than everyone else. Sophie, 10 minutes. A groan from behind a closed door. Then silence. 8 minutes now. The groan again, longer this time. The sound of feet hitting the floor. He set her lunch by the door, poured a second cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his phone scrolling through overnight metrics. 3 of his channels had uploaded while he slept. The numbers were good. One of them, a narrated drama series he'd launched 14 months ago, had crossed 400,000 subscribers sometime around 3 in the morning. He noted it without celebration, the way a farmer notes that the rain came in the night. Expected, necessary. Part of a larger pattern. Olivia appeared at 7:20. She came into the kitchen already dressed for work. Tailored gray blazer, dark pants, hair pulled into the kind of smooth knot that took either natural skill or 15 practiced minutes. She looked polished in the way she always did before 9 a.m., which Ethan had long admired, even if he rarely said so anymore. "There's coffee," he said. "I know." She poured a cup without looking at him. "Sophie's not down yet." "She will be." Olivia checked her phone. Something on the screen made her lips compress slightly, an expression Ethan had memorized over 18 years of marriage. It meant she was irritated, but not at the thing on the phone. The phone was just the nearest available object. "Karen's husband got promoted," she said to the cup in her hand rather than to him. Ethan waited. Senior VP at 37. A pause. "They're looking at houses in Westlake." "Good for him," Ethan said. Olivia looked at him then. A quick evaluating glance, the kind that measured and found something insufficient. She didn't say anything else about it, but she didn't need to. Ethan understood the geometry of the silence. It mapped onto a conversation they'd had versions of for 3 years now, ever since Olivia had joined the company where she currently worked, a content production firm called Meridian Media, and begun spending her days surrounded by people with titles and trajectories and offices with glass walls. He understood why she felt it. He did not resent her for feeling it. He simply hadn't found the right way in 3 years to fix it. Sophie appeared at 7:34, wearing the particular expression of a teenager who had already decided the day was going to be annoying. Her hair was in a messy bun. She was carrying her phone and her backpack, and the kind of look that meant she'd been listening to something through one earbud and had been interrupted. "Morning bug," Ethan said. "Morning." She grabbed the lunch bag from the counter, the note inside it unread as they had been for the past 4 months, and swung the backpack onto her shoulder. "Can we go?" Olivia kissed her on the side of the head. Sophie allowed it without leaning in. The drive to Sophie's school took 11 minutes. For the first 8, Sophie wore both earbuds. Then she took one out and looked at the passing streets. "Dad." "Yeah." "Madison's dad is a surgeon." She said it the way teenagers say things they've heard somewhere and are testing in the air. "He drives a Tesla." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Good surgeon." "I don't know, I guess." "What kind?" Sophie frowned. "I don't know." "Does it matter?" "I guess not." He signaled left. "Does the car matter?" She didn't answer that one. She put the earbud back in. When he pulled up in front of the school, she was out of the car before it had fully stopped. She walked quickly, the way 14-year-olds walk when they're hoping nobody saw them get out of a particular vehicle. Ethan watched her go. He watched until she disappeared through the main doors, and then he sat for a moment in the parking lane with his hands on the wheel. There was a time 2 years ago, maybe 3, when Sophie would have waved from the door. He drove home. The basement studio was exactly what everyone thought it was, except for what it meant. 12 feet by 18 feet. Acoustic foam panels on 3 walls. A standing desk, 2 monitors, a microphone setup, shelving along the back wall holding a dozen external hard drives, a collection of reference books on storytelling and copywriting and audience psychology, and the one thing Ethan had never been able to explain to Olivia in a way she retained 17 framed YouTube play buttons, gold and diamond mostly. A few silver ones he'd kept for sentiment, each with a channel name he'd never told her. Each representing a subscriber count she would have found unbelievable. She'd seen them, of course. She walked through the basement sometimes, but the frames all looked the same, identical matte black mounted in a neat grid, and the channel names meant nothing to her, and she'd never asked what they were. He'd never offered. That had been a mistake. He understood that now. The problem was that there was never a right time to explain it, and the longer it went unexplained, the larger the explanation became. And the larger the explanation became, the more it felt like a confession rather than a conversation. He told her early on that he was doing content work, which was true. He'd said he was building something, which was also true. She had nodded and smiled and waited for it to become something she could describe to her friends at dinner parties. And when it didn't, not in a way she could easily summarize, she had, over several years, allowed her interpretation of it to calcify into something that looked like failure. He sat down at the desk. For 11 minutes, he reviewed overnight performance data across 12 of his 40 channels. Then he opened a script that his head writer at one of his studios, a man in Auckland named Daniel, who Ethan had never met in person but had worked with for 6 years, had sent for his review. He read it, made 47 tracked changes, sent it back with a voice note. Then he switched windows and looked at the quarterly report his operations manager had assembled the night before. 7 companies. 214 employees across 9 countries. Revenue that if he'd printed it on a single sheet of paper and handed it to Olivia over breakfast would have required her to sit down. He didn't print it. He never did. There was a particular quality to the life he'd built that was difficult to explain to someone from the outside. He had not become successful in a way that looked like success. There was no office, no company car, no title he could wear to a dinner party. He had employees he'd never met in person and audiences in the tens of millions who had never seen his face. His work product was invisible ideas, structures, scripts, strategies, and so the work itself appeared invisible to anyone who didn't understand what it was. Olivia didn't understand what it was. He'd been trying to decide for 3 years whether that was her failure or his. He was beginning to think it was his. The argument that changed everything happened on a Thursday. Ethan had learned over 18 years that Thursday was Olivia's worst day. Something about the week's accumulated pressure, the knowledge that Friday wasn't close enough yet, the particular way Thursday evenings had of compressing everything that hadn't been resolved into a tight, uncomfortable space. He had been upstairs making dinner, pasta with the sauce. Sophie liked the one with the roasted red peppers when Olivia came in from work earlier than usual, dropped her bag by the door rather than hanging it, and stood in the kitchen doorway with a look on her face that Ethan clocked immediately. "Bad day," he said. There was a team meeting. She set her keys on the counter. Regional directors were there, the whole production floor. "Okay." They asked everyone to introduce themselves, what they do, how long they've been there. She paused. Someone asked about spouses. He stirred the sauce. "What did you say?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I said you worked from home." Ethan turned around. Not because he wanted to see her face, but because this particular conversation deserved his full attention. "That's true," he said. It didn't feel true. Standing there. She crossed her arms. Not defensively, more like she was holding herself in place. Karen's husband was there. He presented to the whole group. He's heading up their digital expansion. Everyone knew who he was. Her voice didn't rise. That was somehow worse. "I had to say my husband works from home and does content work." "Olivia," I couldn't even explain it. 18 years, and I can't explain to a room of people what my husband does. He set the spoon down. "You could explain it," he said. "You've just decided the explanation isn't impressive enough. Something shifted in her face. That's not fair. I know. He kept his voice level. I'm not saying it to be unfair. I'm saying it because I think it's what's actually happening. She uncrossed her arms, walked to the island and sat down on one of the bar stools, and he noticed that she looked tired in a way that went deeper than the workday. She looked tired in a way that had been accumulating for longer than that. Ethan? Her voice was lower now. Sophie asked me last week why you don't have a real job like other dads. He was quiet. I didn't know what to tell her. You could have said I work from home and explained, she's 14, she doesn't want an explanation, she wants to be able to say something when her friends ask. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't performing this, and I want to be able to say something when mine ask. He looked at her. At the woman he'd married at 22 who had been funny and impatient and brilliant with languages, who had once driven 6 hours to a concert because they couldn't afford plane tickets, who had grown into this polished, anxious version of herself that he still recognized and still loved, and increasingly found himself unable to reach. What do you want me to say? He asked. I want you to get a real job. The words landed without much ceremony. She said them the way you say something you've been rehearsing. A real job? I'm tired of pretending. She met his eyes steadily. I'm tired of explaining. I'm tired of being embarrassed introducing you to people and not being able to explain what You're embarrassed. She didn't flinch. Sometimes, yes. The quiet that followed lasted long enough that the sauce on the stove began to bubble at the edges. Ethan turned and lowered the heat. He did it slowly, taking the moment to make a decision that he'd been circling for 3 years. When he turned back around, something had settled in his expression. Not anger. Not hurt exactly. Something more like a conclusion. Okay, he said. Olivia blinked. Okay, what? I'll get a job. He picked up the spoon again. I'll go work in an office. She watched him, like she wasn't sure he meant it. I'll start Monday, he said. If I can find something that fits. She opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. He kept his voice even. I'm telling you I hear you. She stayed at the island through dinner. Sophie ate quickly and disappeared upstairs. The house felt pressurized in a particular way, not angry exactly, but altered, like a room after weather has moved through it. Later, after Olivia had gone to bed, Ethan went down to the basement. He sat at the standing desk and didn't sit. He stood for a long time looking at the screen, at the metrics and the emails and the 17 framed play buttons on the wall, and he thought about what she'd said with the careful, systematic honesty he applied to everything. She was embarrassed. His wife was embarrassed by him. And the hardest part, the part that kept him standing there past midnight, was that he understood why. Not because he was wrong, not because his life was a failure, but because he had let a gap grow between who he was and what she knew, and now the gap was so wide that she was filling it with shame. He pulled up the employee portal for Meridian Media. His company, one of the 7. He scrolled until he found an open posting senior creative consultant, internal transfer from a partner studio. The kind of position that didn't require a public resume because it was meant for someone moving laterally within the network. He was technically always moving laterally within the network. He filled out the internal form. Under the field that asked for his professional name, he typed E. Walker, not Ethan, not the founder's initials that every senior manager at Meridian already recognized and never attached to a face. Just E. Walker, new hire, Monday start. He submitted, it turned off the monitor and went upstairs to bed. Olivia was asleep on her side, facing away from him. He lay down carefully, not wanting to wake her, and stared at the ceiling for a long time in the dark. He was the founder of a media empire his wife had never heard of. Starting Monday, he was going to be her colleague. But he hadn't told Olivia what company. She hadn't asked. That was the thing about the argument, she'd said. What she needed to say, he'd said he would handle it, and the next morning the house had returned to its normal operational rhythm. Coffee. Lunches. Sophie's earbuds. The particular silence of 2 people who loved each other and had run out of the language to say so. On Friday afternoon, while Olivia was at work and Sophie was at school, Ethan sat in the basement and made a series of phone calls. The first was to Marcus Webb, his COO, a man in his mid-40s, who had been running the operational side of Ethan's media network for 8 years, and who was, as far as anyone at any of the 7 companies, knew the closest thing to a visible authority figure that EW had. Marcus was the face. Ethan was the architect behind the face. I'm going to work at Meridian for a while, Ethan said. Silence on the line. Then, you're going to work at your own company. under the creative consultant role that's posted. Ethan, a longer silence. Why? I want to see it from the inside. You've seen it from the inside. You built it. I built the structure. I've never sat inside it. He paused. And there are things I want to understand about how it's running at the floor level that I can't see from up here. This was true. It was not the complete truth. Does anyone there know who you are? Marcus, you, Daniel in Auckland. He picked up a pen from the desk and turned it over in his fingers. Nobody on the production floor. Nobody in leadership below VP. The VP will recognize your name. I'm going in as E. Walker, Senior Creative Consultant. Nobody's going to connect that to the founder's initials unless they're already looking for a connection. Another pause. What does Olivia think about this? She thinks I finally got a real job. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh. And when this ends, I don't know yet. Ethan, Marcus, a breath on the other end. When do you start? Monday. I'll let Priya know to expect you. Priya Sharma was Meridian's creative director. Young, sharp, someone Ethan had brought on 3 years ago based on her portfolio alone. They had communicated exclusively by email and only occasionally. She would have no idea what he looked like. Does she need to know? No. Tell her the usual. Internal transfer from partner studio. Strong creative background. Treat him like anyone else. That's going to be difficult when he starts fixing things you built. Ethan almost smiled. Tell her to try. After he hung up, he sat for a moment with the pen still in his hand. Then he opened his email and drafted a quick note to the Meridian HR coordinator confirming his Monday start. The subject line read, New hire E. Walker, Senior Creative Consultant. He hit send. Then he went upstairs, started dinner, and when Sophie came home from school, she found him at the stove and she stood in the kitchen doorway with her earbuds in one hand and a look on her face that was for a brief, unguarded second the same look she used to give him when she was 9 years old and he'd come to pick her up from school. Dad? She put the earbuds in her pocket. Are you making the pasta? Yeah, Bug. She set her backpack down carefully, the way she only did when she wanted something. The one with the peppers. The one with the peppers? She nodded once and sat down at the island. They didn't talk much, but she stayed in the kitchen while he cooked, scrolling her phone, and when Olivia came home 20 minutes later and found both of them there, something moved across her face that Ethan caught and held and didn't name. At dinner, Olivia asked about his week. He said it had been productive. She asked what he'd been working on. He said a few projects. She nodded, her fork moving, and he watched her process the inadequacy of the answer in real time, watched her decide not to push it to save the energy to let it go. Normally, this made him feel something painful. Tonight, it felt different. Because on Monday, everything she thought she understood about him was going to begin slowly, quietly to change. The Meridian Media Office occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass and steel building on the west side of downtown. Ethan had paid for those floors in cash through a holding company 4 years ago. He had chosen the building because of the light, the north-facing windows, the particular quality of the afternoon sun across the 14th floor, which he'd calculated would reduce screen glare during peak editing hours. He'd never been inside it. He walked through the lobby at 8:52 on Monday morning, wearing the kind of clothes he owned but rarely wore: dark jeans, a fitted navy sweater, shoes that weren't his basement sneakers. He looked, Olivia had said at breakfast that morning with a complicated expression, nice. He rode the elevator to 14th. The doors opened onto a space he recognized from architectural renders and floor plans, but had never experienced as a physical reality. Open plan. Good bones. The equipment he'd spec'd was better than most independent studios, though you had to know what you were looking at to notice. Monitors at the right height, acoustic panels positioned for function rather than aesthetics. He'd spent 3 hours choosing the desk configuration. It worked better in person than on paper. 15 people looked up when he stepped off the elevator. He counted 6 sustained looks. The first was from a young man near the window, mid to late 20s, with the kind of posture that came from never having been told he was wrong about anything. Graphic designer from the dual monitors and the tablet propped at an angle on his desk. He looked Ethan up and down with the frank appraisal of someone who had already made a judgment before the elevator doors had fully opened. The second look came from a young woman at the social media station, late 20s or younger, pretty with the slightly hyper-vigilant energy of someone who was always tracking multiple conversations at once. She leaned to say something to the woman beside her and glanced back in Ethan's direction. The third look, the one that was different from the others, came from a woman sitting in the editing bay along the far wall. She was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair pulled back in the loose, practical way of someone who spent most of her day wearing headphones. She was looking at him the way you look at something you haven't seen before and want to understand. Not dismissively, not flirtatiously, just openly. He noted all three looks without responding to any of them. Priya Sharma met him at the end of the hall. She was exactly what her emails suggested. Brisk, confident, the kind of organized that bordered on tightly wound. She was maybe 32, wearing a blazer and glasses, and an expression of someone who had 12 things to accomplish before 11. E. Walker. She extended her hand. Priya Sharma, creative director. Priya. He shook it. Her grip was firm. Good to be here. Marcus spoke highly of the transfer. She was already walking, expecting him to follow. He did. We're mid-cycle on 2 major projects, so you'll be thrown in immediately. Is that a problem? No. She glanced at him sideways. A quick reassessment. Good. She pushed open a glass door to a smaller conference room. I'll introduce you to the team in about an hour. In the meantime, she slid a tablet across the small table. Project briefs. The Morrison Media campaign is the one that has everyone stressed. Deadline in 12 days. Take a look. He took the tablet. She left. He sat down at the conference table and looked at the brief. The Morrison Media campaign. He knew it had approved the overall strategy from his desk in the basement 6 weeks ago. But what he was looking at now was what had happened to the strategy and the gap between approval and execution, and what he was seeing made him set the tablet down for a moment and look at the ceiling. They drifted, significantly, not through incompetence, through the ordinary accumulation of small decisions, a hook that had been softened for reasons of caution, a title that had been changed to be more searchable rather than more compelling, a thumbnail direction that had been decided by committee rather than by anyone with enough conviction to push back. Each individual decision was defensible. Together they had produced something that would perform adequately and feel forgettable. He picked the tablet back up and began to read. By the time Priya came back for the team introduction, he'd already identified 7 specific problems and 3 potential solutions. He didn't mention any of them. Not yet. There was a right time for that. Olivia was not in the building when he arrived. He knew this because he'd checked the night before what her Monday schedule looked like. She came in at 9:30. Different entrance, she worked on 15 in the business development unit, a floor and a half above where he was starting. He would see her eventually. It was a 14,000 square foot office on 2 floors with roughly 60 employees. They would cross paths. He had not figured out exactly what he was going to do when that happened. What he did know, he was not going to hide. He was not going to engineer the meeting, and he was not going to avoid it. He was going to do his job, and he was going to let things develop in whatever way things developed. And he was going to try for the first time in years to be in the same space as his wife and let her see what he actually was. Just without knowing it was him doing it. He was aware this was not a simple plan. He was also aware that he didn't have a better one. The team introduction happened at 10. Priya stood at the whiteboard and gestured at him with the kind of economy of motion that meant she had done this many times. This is E. Walker, senior creative consultant joining us through the partner network. He'll be working on the Morrison campaign and anything else that needs a fresh eye. She looked at him. Anything you want to add? No, he said. I'm just here to help. There was a beat. The young man by the window, whose name Ethan had since learned was Jason, leaned back in his chair with a fraction too much casualness. Fresh eye from where? Various places. Like places you haven't heard of. He kept his voice level. Not unfriendly, just definite. Jason held the look for a moment, then looked away. The woman from the social media station was Emma. She had the kind of friendly smile that contained a lot of assessment. She said, "Nice to meet you, E," with a slight emphasis on the initial that was very nearly an eye roll. The woman from the editing bay said quietly, "Welcome." Her name, Priya had said, was Chloe. Ethan had nodded at her, and she had nodded back, and there was nothing notable about the exchange, except that it was the only introduction in the room that felt uncomplicated. He was 20 minutes into reviewing the Morrison campaign files at his assigned desk when Olivia walked through the door. He had been watching the entrance without appearing to watch it. The particular skill of a man who had spent years paying attention without advertising the fact, and he saw her come in from the elevator carrying her laptop and a coffee from the place on the ground floor talking to a colleague he didn't recognize. She was in her element, confident. The collar of her blazer turned up slightly the way she did when she was feeling good about the day. She scanned the room the way anyone does when entering a familiar space, checking for changes, cataloging the usual, and her eyes passed over the new desk near the windows and over the man sitting at it and kept moving. She didn't recognize him, or rather, she recognized him as a new person, as someone who hadn't been there on Friday, as the new creative consultant Priya had mentioned in the all-hands email this morning. She did not recognize him as her husband. He was sitting differently. Different clothes, different context. In her mind, Ethan Walker sat in a basement. The man she was seeing was sitting in an office, and the brain performs exactly this kind of context collapse with remarkable efficiency. The man you know at home does not register as the same man in an unfamiliar context. Not immediately. She disappeared through the glass door toward the staircase. Ethan turned back to his screen. He was here. She was here. For the first time in 3 years, they were in the same world. He pulled up the Morrison campaign files and began to work. The thing about walking into a room where you are unknown is that you get to be observed without obstruction. By the end of his second day, Ethan had cataloged the office the way he cataloged everything systematically without judgment, looking for patterns rather than conclusions. Jason Merritt was the most visible person in the room, not the most talented. Visible was different from talented and frequently confused for it by people who hadn't learned yet to look twice. Jason was quick-loud in the way that drew attention without quite demanding it, and carried the particular confidence of someone who'd been the best in every room until he entered this one and then redefined the room as not counting. He was 28, which Ethan at 28 had been entirely different. At 28, Ethan had already been 6 years into building the first of his channels, working in a one-bedroom apartment with a microphone he'd bought used from a local recording studio and a laptop that overheated when he ran it for more than 4 hours. He had not been confident in the way Jason was confident. He'd been driven, which was not the same thing. Emma Park occupied the social media station and moved through the office with the efficiency of someone who understood that information was currency and had learned to earn it. She was 24, and she was faster than she appeared, and she was watching him the way people watch something that doesn't quite fit their existing categories. He could work with that. Curiosity was always more useful than contempt. Chloe Reeves, he'd learned on day 2, was their best editor. She had 3 years at Meridian, and before that a stint at a production company that he recognized his company, actually a small studio that he'd folded into the Meridian network before she joined it. She had a skill for pacing that was visible even in the rough cuts he'd seen during his first day's file review. She understood emotional rhythm. Not everyone did. He'd also learned by the end of Tuesday that the Morrison campaign was in worse shape than the brief had made it look. The crisis broke on Wednesday. Ethan was reviewing footage at his desk when the tone of the room changed, one of those invisible shifts that happen in open-plan offices, where something wrong becomes audible before anyone said anything specific. He looked up. Priya was standing in the glass-walled conference room with her phone pressed to her ear and the expression of someone receiving information they'd hoped not to receive. Jason was already on his feet, moving toward the room. Emma had stopped what she was doing and was watching the conference room with the focused attention of someone who understood the magnitude before being told it. Ethan took off his headphones. He waited. It took 3 minutes for Priya to emerge from the conference room. "Morrison just called," she said. She said it to the room, which was what you did when the news was large enough that everyone needed to hear it simultaneously. "They're reviewing the contract." Reviewing the contract was a phrase that meant exactly one thing in media production they were considering leaving. "The campaign numbers they saw this morning?" Priya stopped, recalibrated. "They're not confident in the direction." "What numbers?" Jason was already pulling up something on his tablet. "The projected reach. The test metrics from the sample content. They had their analytics team look at it." She set her phone on the conference table. "The hook isn't landing. The title isn't performing in test environments. They showed it to a focus group and—" She stopped again. "And what?" Emma said. 40% said they would keep scrolling. Silence in the room. "The contract is $5 million, Priya said. She didn't need to add anything else. Jason spread his hands. "Okay. We fixed the hook. We reworked the title. It's 12 days to deadline. That's enough time. They want to see a revised direction in 72 hours, or they're pulling." The number hit the room like weather. 72 hours. People started talking. Jason proposed 3 revised hook approaches in rapid succession. Emma called a contact at a media analytics firm. Priya started assigning tasks. Within 20 minutes, the office was in motion, the organized, slightly frantic motion of a team that was capable and motivated and trying to solve the wrong problem. Ethan watched this for 10 minutes. Then he went and got a coffee from the kitchen, came back to his desk, opened the original Morrison brief, and started reading it from the beginning. The mistake he'd identified on day one was not in the hook. It was not in the title, and it was not in the thumbnail. Those were symptoms. The mistake was in the story. He worked through lunch. Chloe worked through lunch. At 1:30, she appeared at the edge of his desk, not sitting, just standing with her laptop at an angle that said she'd come over for something specific and hadn't decided yet whether to say it. "You're not participating in the brainstorm," she said. He looked up from the brief. "Not yet." She absorbed this. "Jason thinks you don't know enough about the campaign to contribute." "That's probably right," Ethan said. "What do you think?" The question caught her slightly off balance. He could see it in the way she shifted her weight. She'd come prepared for a different answer. "I think you know more than you're saying," she said finally. He held her eyes for a moment. She didn't look away. "What's your read on the campaign?" he said. "The content doesn't know what it wants." She said it without hesitation. "It's trying to be informative and entertaining and promotional simultaneously, and it's none of them well. The hook is a symptom." She paused. "The story is wrong." He looked at her steadily. "Yeah, I've been saying that for 2 weeks." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not anger, more like the compressed feeling of having been heard late. No one listened. "I heard you," he said, "just now." She looked at him for another moment, then nodded once and went back to her desk. He watched her go. Then he turned back to the brief and began writing. At 4:15, Ethan stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. The brainstorm was still in progress. Jason had filled one whiteboard with proposed hooks, and Jason's handwriting had the aggressive legibility of someone who wrote to be watched large and slightly tilted. The room was tired in the way rooms get tired after several hours of trying hard in the wrong direction. Ethan picked up a marker. He didn't say anything first. He simply started writing. Across the top of the second whiteboard, he wrote, "What is this campaign actually about?" Jason made a sound. "We know what it's about. It's about Morrison's Q3 expansion." "Right." Ethan kept writing. "Is the audience Morrison's business partners?" "No, it's consumer audience. People who don't know anything about Morrison's Q3 expansion and don't care about it." He wrote 2 columns. "What does the audience want? And what are we giving them?" He turned to the room. "Someone fill in the second column." Emma went first. "Visibility of the expansion, key markets, growth story." Ethan wrote it down without editorial comment. Jason added 2 more items. Then Chloe quietly from her desk said, "We're giving them facts in a format that feels like homework." Ethan wrote that down too. "Now." He drew a line between the columns. The audience wants to feel something. They want to be interested. They want to be told a story that lands them somewhere new. He wrote under the first column, "Feeling of discovery, sense of momentum, someone to root for." Morrison's campaign gives them a company's data. He tapped the second column. "We've been trying to write a better data delivery system, but that's not a campaign. That's an infographic." The room was quiet. "The hook," he continued, "should start with a person. One person inside Morrison's story. Someone with stakes. Someone who wins or loses depending on what happens." He wrote a new hook on the board, not a polished version, just the bones. A first-person opening, a specific location, a decision being made. The title follows the emotion, not the expansion. The thumbnail shows a face, not a building. He turned around. "That's the campaign." Jason crossed his arms. "We've been working on this for 3 hours." "I know. You just walked in and decided you knew better." "I didn't decide anything." Ethan capped the marker. "I read the brief." "A moment. The hook you have now starts with 'in an era of rapid expansion,'" Ethan said. "Do you know how many videos start with some version of 'in an era of'?" Emma's mouth curved. She clearly did know. "The answer is approximately 47,000 currently indexed on the platform," he said. "None of the top-performing ones." He set the marker down. "We have 72 hours. I'll have a revised hook title and opening sequence direction to Priya by tomorrow morning." He walked back to his desk. The room didn't applaud. It didn't gasp. It did what rooms do when something shifts. It recalibrated. People turned back to their screens with a slightly different energy. Not converted, not completely, but differently oriented. Jason said loud enough to carry, 40 years old and still doing the new guy power move. Ethan sat back down at his desk without responding. He'd learned years ago that the people who felt the need to annotate other people's confidence were usually uncertain about their own. He worked until 8. Priya stayed until 7:30, reviewed what he'd written, looked at him for a long time over the edge of her glasses and said, "This is good. Thank you. I'm going to need to know more about your background at some point. I'll tell you whatever you need to know." She made a sound that acknowledged this without quite accepting it, picked up her bag and left. Chloe was still at her editing station when he was packing up. She had her headphones on, the glow of 2 monitors catching the side of her face. She'd been there since morning. He paused at the edge of her bay, not wanting to startle her, and she looked up. She pulled one side of the headphones off. "Heading out?" "Yeah." He looked at her screens. She was cutting something footage of a building, a door, someone's hands. "How's it going?" "I'm trying to see if the visual direction works with what you wrote today." She turned the monitor slightly. "If I approach it the way you described leading with a person, I need to rebuild the opening sequence. Can you do that by morning?" "I can do it by midnight." He looked at the screen for a moment. She'd already started. The opening frame was a woman's face, caught mid-movement, not posed. Specific, real. Exactly what he'd meant. "That's good," he said. She nodded, pulled the headphone back on. He took the elevator down to the lobby. On the street, he pulled out his phone and saw 2 texts from Olivia. The first sent at 6:15. "You still at work?" The second sent at 7:40. "Don't worry about dinner. Sophie and I ordered pizza." He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Olivia and Sophie had ordered pizza. His wife and daughter at home together ordering pizza. A normal evening, a Tuesday evening thing. The thing he would normally have cooked for, set the table for, cleaned up after. There was a new ordinary settling into place, and he wasn't sure yet what to make of it. He texted back, "Sorry. Tied up with a project. Home in 30. 3 dots appeared. Then, okay, there's pizza left." He put his phone in his pocket and walked to his car. The drive home took 22 minutes. He found the house dark downstairs and lit upstairs Olivia's reading light in the bedroom, the bluish glow of Sophie's TV under her door. He moved through the kitchen quietly, found the pizza box on the counter with 2 slices left and ate them, standing at the counter without turning on the overhead light. He was still at the counter thinking about the Morrison campaign when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Olivia, in her pajamas, hair down. She looked surprised to find him there. "You're back." She checked the time on the microwave. "It's late." "I know. Sorry." She looked at the pizza box at him, at something she was trying to figure out. "How was it?" He considered the answer. "Interesting." She leaned against the counter across from him. It was the closest they'd been in several days. "What was interesting? The work." He looked at the pizza in his hand. "There's a campaign that's been going the wrong direction. We were trying to fix the surface without fixing the thing underneath it." She was quiet for a moment. And I think we fixed it, or the beginning of it." She nodded slowly, not the polished nod she used in meetings, the real one where she was actually thinking. "What was wrong with it?" "The story was wrong. They were leading with information when they should have been leading with a person." He finished the slice. "Information tells you what happened. A person makes you want to know how it ends." A long pause. "That's a good way to think about it," she said. "It's what I do," he said. She looked at him. Then, not the measuring, insufficient look of the past several years, but something more like the look she used to give him when she was paying close attention. When something he said had snagged on something in her, and she was letting it work. She didn't say anything else. She went to the cabinet and got a glass of water. "There's more pizza tomorrow," she said from the sink. "Good," he said. She went back upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for another few minutes in the dark, thinking about the Morrison campaign, and about story, and about the way a person could be invisible in a room simply because the room hadn't expected to find them there. Then he went upstairs and got ready for bed. He set his alarm for 5. He didn't need to, but he always did. By the end of the first week, 3 things had happened. The first, the Morrison campaign revision landed. Ethan's revised hook, specific personal kinetic, went to the client on Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Morrison's creative director had called Priya to say they were interested. By Friday morning, they had confirmed the campaign was back on track. The $5 million contract held. The office was not quiet about this. Jason, to his credit, said nothing directly critical. He was the kind of person who knew when to absorb something and when to fight it, and he was smart enough to understand that the Morrison outcome was a loss on his ledger only if he let it become one. He went to lunch with Emma on Friday and came back with the particular reset energy of someone who had talked himself into a revised position. He nodded at Ethan when he passed his desk. Not warmly, but deliberately. Emma asked Ethan at the end of Friday with the directness of someone who has decided subtlety is taking too long. "Where did you come from exactly?" "Various places," he said, which was the same thing he'd said to Jason on day one. "You said that already." She pulled her chair over without asking, which he noted with approval. Asking for permission to approach was a particular kind of performance. "I Googled Ewalker Creative Media and got approximately nothing." "That's correct." "That's strange. Or I'm just not the kind of person who makes a lot of noise online." She stared at him for a moment. "Everyone who works in digital media makes noise online. Except me." She considered this. "You're either very good at privacy," she said, "or you're somebody I should have heard of and haven't." He held her gaze. "Or I'm just a guy who knows his job." She leaned back. "I'm going to figure it out." "Okay," he said. The second thing that happened in the first week, Sophie called him on Friday evening while he was still in the office to tell him something that had happened in her history class. Not because it was important exactly. It was a small thing. A classroom debate she'd participated in, a moment where she'd said something and the teacher had agreed but because she wanted to tell someone. She'd called him instead of Olivia. He sat in the empty office after everyone had left and listened to her describe it the way she'd said that colonization wasn't just a political event, it was a psychological one, and the way the teacher had stopped and said, "That's a mature way to frame it," and the way that had felt, and he said the things you say when someone you love has had a small triumph. He said them without overselling it. Sophie was 14 and already suspicious of overselling. "Good bug," he said. "That's exactly the right way to think about it." "I heard you and Mom talking about stories once," she said. "Like how stories are the things underneath things. I think that's what I meant." He was quiet for a moment. "When did you hear that?" he said. "I don't know. A while ago." A pause. "You used to say things like that a lot. When I was little, I still say things like that." "Yeah, but you mostly say them in the basement." He looked at the window across the room at the city beyond it. "I'll say them somewhere else from now on," he said. A pause. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I'm glad you got a job." Then quickly before he could respond, "Not like in a bad way, just like I don't know. It's different." "Different how? You seem like you're somewhere." She struggled with it the way 14-year-olds struggle with large ideas expressed in small words. "Before you were always in the basement, and I didn't know what you were doing, and it felt like—" She stopped. "Like what? Like you were hiding?" He breathed slowly. "I wasn't hiding." "I know," she said. "I think I know that now." Another pause. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry." He meant it completely. "You said what you felt. That's what I want you to always do." After they hung up, he sat for a long time. Not hiding. He'd been building. And the difference between hiding and building, he understood now, was not in the action, but in whether the people who loved you could see what you were building toward. And he hadn't let them see it. Not because he was afraid, but because he'd been so focused on the building that he'd forgotten the people. That was the mistake, not the silence, the distance. He picked up his keys and drove home. The third thing that had happened, Olivia had begun without apparently meaning to looking at him differently. Not dramatically, not in a way she would have admitted or perhaps even noticed. But he caught it on Wednesday when she'd passed through 14 on her way to somewhere and glanced at his desk without stopping. On Thursday when he'd met her in the elevator going down and she'd said something about the Morrison win she'd heard about in a meeting, and there had been something in her voice that was almost proud before she'd caught it and replaced it with neutral. On Friday at dinner, when he'd explained what he was actually doing on the campaign, not in detail, but in principle, and she'd listened without looking at her phone, he was becoming to his wife someone she was becoming curious about. He was 40 years old, sitting in a basement no more. And for the first time in longer than he could account for, he thought that something might be repairable.
What?
The following Monday, Jason tried to steal his work. Not overtly, not in the way of a person who had planned it and executed it deliberately. In the way of a person who had appropriated something and having done so convinced themselves it was theirs. The Monday morning all hands included a review of the Morrison win. Priya presented the revised campaign to the group. She credited the team's collaborative response to the crisis. She noted the quick turnaround. She said, strong creative direction without attributing it specifically. Jason. When given the floor for the creative update, described the revised hook in language that was close enough to what Ethan had written on the whiteboard the previous Wednesday to be traceable and distant enough to be deniable. He said, "What we realized was that we needed to lead with a person rather than a data point." The emotional entry was missing. He did not look at Ethan when he said it. Ethan looked at Jason when he heard it. Jason held the room for another 2 minutes, expanding on the concept with the confidence of a man who had lived with an idea long enough that it had become his through proximity. He drew on the whiteboard. He used the word intuition to describe what had been in fact a 10-minute structural analysis. Ethan did not interrupt him. He did not correct him. After the meeting, Priya caught Ethan in the corridor and said quietly and with extreme precision, "I noticed." "It's fine," Ethan said. "It's not fine. It's also not worth making an incident over." He shifted his coffee cup from one hand to the other. "If it becomes a pattern, it becomes an issue. This time, it's just information." Priya looked at him for a moment. Information about what? About who Jason is when he's uncomfortable. She seemed to consider whether she believed in this particular approach. Her expression suggested she had doubts. "You could just say something," she said. "I know." He looked down the corridor. "I'd rather watch what he does next." What Jason did next was try to remove Ethan from the next major project. The Harrington Electronics campaign, a 3-month retainer national reach, came in through business development on Thursday. It was exactly the scale of work that required someone with Ethan's skill set, and Jason moved immediately to have himself assigned as lead creative with a note in the project brief that the consultant role may not be necessary for this phase. Priya assigned Ethan to the project anyway. She did it without explanation, and she did not copy Jason on the email, which was its own kind of message. Ethan read the assignment, noted that Jason had attempted it, noted that Priya had countered it, and filed both observations in the same internal category as the Morrison incident. Information. Olivia found him at his desk on Wednesday of the second week, not as his wife, as a colleague. She was passing through the 14th floor on her way to a meeting, and she stopped. Perhaps it was the angle of the light. Perhaps it was the particular quality of stillness he had when he was focused on something. And she came to his desk in the way of someone who has already started a sentence before deciding to say it. "You're the Morrison Wynn person," she said. He looked up, kept his face arranged the way he'd practiced. "Depends who you ask," he said. She sat down in the chair beside his desk. "I work upstairs. Business development." She extended her hand. "Olivia Walker." He shook it. "E. Walker," he said. She smiled with the automatic social warmth of a practiced networker. "Walker? Funny. Coincidence," he said. "Probably." She looked at his desk, the organized chaos of multiple simultaneous briefs. "I heard you changed the whole direction of the Morrison campaign in one afternoon." "The direction was already there," he said. "It just needed someone to name it." She looked at him for a moment, something working in her face that he couldn't quite read. "You know, my husband says things like that." "Like what?" "Like things under things. He's always saying the problem is never the surface problem. It's the thing underneath that you have to look for." She paused. "He works in content too. Has for years. Sounds like he knows what he's doing." She glanced down. "It's hard to tell sometimes." She said it without bitterness, just honestly. The way people say things when they've stopped rehearsing. From the outside, content work is sort of, she searched for the word, invisible. "It usually is," Ethan said, "until it isn't." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means the work is mostly invisible right up until the moment the numbers appear, and then suddenly it's the most visible thing in the room." He picked up his pen. "That's the nature of building things. They're invisible until they're real." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "He's actually good at it," she said, quietly, as if admitting something. She stopped. "It's hard to appreciate something you can't see," Ethan said. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in longer than he could immediately calculate. Then someone called her name from the doorway, and she stood up, smoothing her blazer. "Nice to meet you," she said. "You too," he said. He watched her go. He turned back to the Harrington brief. His hands were absolutely steady. But underneath his chest, something had shifted, something quiet and significant, and he sat with it for a long moment before he let himself move on. Chan. The Harrington Electronics campaign required a site visit to their regional distribution hub in Henderson, Nevada. Priya assigned the trip on a Friday afternoon, 3 days starting the following Tuesday. Creative lead E. Walker. Supporting editor Chloe Reeves. She put it on the shared calendar at 4:58 and left at 5. The kind of decision that gets made cleanly when the decision maker is no longer in the building to second guess it. Jason saw the calendar update from his desk at 4:59. The expression on his face was not something he managed to control before Emma noticed it. Emma said nothing about it to Jason, but on Monday morning she stopped by Ethan's desk with coffee and said conversationally, "Jason's not happy." "I know," Ethan said. "He thinks he should have been assigned the site visit." "He probably should have been," Ethan said. "He has seniority on the account." Emma waited. This was not the response she'd expected. "Priya made a call," he said. "I'll make it work." "You're not going to fight for it." "I don't fight for assignments." He looked up at her. "I do the work and let the work make the argument." Emma looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone recalibrating an assessment. Then she picked up her coffee and walked back to her desk and said nothing more about it. But he told Olivia that night that he had a work trip. She was loading the dishwasher when he said it, and she turned around with a look that lasted about 1 second before she organized it into something more neutral. 3 days, he said. Vegas. Harrington Electronics site visit. That's the campaign that came in last week. She said it without thinking, then caught herself because she'd only heard about the Harrington campaign through the internal newsletter that came to the whole company. If she placed that reference too precisely, it would require an explanation of how she knew about it. He let it pass. "Yeah," he said. "It is significant work. I'll try to call every night." She looked at him for a moment. The dishwasher hummed between them. "Okay," she said. "Will you and Sophie be all right?" Something moved across her face. "We've been fine when you're in the basement," she said. Then realizing how it landed, "I just mean, yes, we'll be fine." He nodded. He was trying to read whether there was something underneath the flatness of the exchange, whether she was bothered by the trip, whether she missed him before he'd even left, and he couldn't quite get there. They'd been out of practice at reading each other for too long. "Sophie has swim on Thursday," he said. "I know her schedule." "I know you do." He turned toward the stairs. "I'll be home by Friday dinner." She said something under her breath. He was halfway up the stairs and he stopped and turned. "What?" She was standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame. "I said be careful." He looked at her for a moment. "Always," he said. Las Vegas was not a place Ethan particularly liked. He'd been there 4 times over the years once, for a content industry conference twice, for client meetings once. When he and Olivia had gone for a weekend before Sophie was born, back when they were still the kind of couple who did things on impulse. He remembered that trip the way Olivia had laughed at a terrible magic show on the Strip, and the way the laughter had been so unself-conscious, so free of the performance, that her laughter sometimes had at social events. She'd just laughed, full and unguarded. He'd fallen a little more in love with her in that moment. He thought about that on the flight out. Chloe was in the seat across the aisle. She'd brought a notebook physical, ruled the kind of notebook that was either affectation or genuine habit. With her after 2 weeks in the office, he suspected genuine habit. She'd been writing in it since before takeoff. Not on her phone. Not on a laptop. A pen and a notebook. He turned away and looked out the window. The Harrington Electronics hub was 30 minutes outside Las Vegas. It was exactly what its description suggested, a large, efficiently managed distribution center. Not architecturally interesting, staffed by people who knew their jobs and had no particular interest in being filmed doing them. The regional director, a woman in her 50s named Carla, met them in the lobby with the cautious hospitality of someone who had agreed to this before fully understanding what it would involve. Ethan spent the first afternoon asking Carla questions, not about the facility's metrics, not about their expansion plans, about the people who had worked there the longest, what they were proud of, what they wished. More customers understood about what distribution actually meant. Carla, who had expected to deliver a structured tour and a set of talking points, found herself instead having a 2-hour conversation that kept widening into areas she hadn't prepared for. By the time they left for the hotel, she had shaken Ethan's hand twice, without quite knowing why. In the car back, Chloe was quiet for a few miles. Then she said, "You do that thing where you ask questions that sound simple but aren't." "What do you mean?" "Like you asked her what she was proud of. That's not a normal interview question. It's the most important question." He looked at the desert outside the window. If you want to tell someone's story, you start by finding out what they care about, not what they want you to think about them, what they actually care about. She wrote something in her notebook. "What are you writing?" he said. "What you just said." He glanced over. "You can say that out loud." I know, I write things down so I remember them later. She looked up from the notebook. Most people who say important things don't know they're saying them. He considered this. What about you? What about me? What do you care about, not what you want me to think? What you actually care about? She was quiet for a moment. The desert moved past. Getting it right, she said finally. The edit, the story and the timeline. There's a version of every piece of footage where everything is technically correct and it still feels like nothing. And then there's the version where, I don't know, where you feel it. She looked at her hands. I care about finding that version. He nodded. What about you? She said. Building things that last, he said. That's all it's ever been. She looked at him. That's not a media industry answer. No? He agreed. Most people in this business talk about reach and growth and monetization. Those are measurements. They're not reasons. She wrote something else down. The hotel was on the Strip. Rooms on different floors, she was on 12. He was on 15 and they'd agreed to dinner at 7 in the hotel restaurant. He'd suggested the hotel restaurant specifically, not the Strip, not a separate venue, not anywhere that involved effort. Effort, he had learned, changed the nature of things. She arrived 3 minutes before 7 in the same clothes she'd worn to the facility, which was something he noticed without making anything of it. She wasn't treating this as a performance. That was a quality he respected. They sat across from each other at a table near the window. The view was the Strip, all light and movement, the kind of spectacle that New York and Tokyo and Paris did not prepare you for because it was not trying to be beautiful, only overwhelming. Have you been here before? She asked. A few times. You? Once. For a conference. I ate at the hotel the whole time and didn't see any of it. She looked at the view. It's stranger than I remembered. They ordered. The restaurant was busy enough that the ambient sound took care of what would otherwise have been silence. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes? Why are you at Meridian? He looked at her. I don't mean I know you transferred from the partner network, she said. I mean, why you specifically? You're not the usual profile for someone who takes a consultant role at our level. A beat. You're too good at this for this to be where you're going. He held her gaze for a moment. What if it's where I want to be right now? She considered that. Then there's something you want at Meridian that you can't get somewhere else. Maybe I just like the team. You don't know the team well enough yet to like us. She said it without offense, just observationally. And you don't seem like someone who makes decisions based on team culture. What do I seem like? She picked up her water glass. Someone who makes decisions based on long-term outcomes. She paused. Someone who can see something that isn't there yet and build toward it. He didn't say anything. You're patient in a way that most creative people aren't, she continued. Even the Morrison thing, you sat on that for 2 days before you went to the whiteboard. You were watching us fail before you said anything. She wasn't accusing, just describing. That's not what someone does if they're trying to prove themselves. That's what someone does if they already know. Already know what? That they're right. She set the glass down. And that being right matters less than the right moment to say it. He looked at her. She was 26 years old. She had her notebook beside her plate like a piece of equipment she didn't go anywhere without. I've been building things for a long time, he said. I know what patience is worth. How long? Since I was 23. She did the math. 17 years in content, in various forms. And you took a consultant position at a mid-sized studio. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. There are things you can't see from the top, he said. Sometimes you have to get back into the room to understand what's actually happening. She absorbed this. He could see her processing it, filing it alongside the other things that didn't quite fit. I'm going to trust that, she said eventually, but I still think there's something you're not saying. There are a lot of things I'm not saying, he said. That doesn't mean they're secrets. She smiled not broadly, just at the corner of her mouth. That's a very particular kind of dodge. It's not a dodge, it's a deferral. What's the difference? A dodge avoids something. A deferral waits for the right time. She looked at him for a moment, then she picked up her menu. I hope the time comes soon, she said, because I think knowing would be interesting. They walked after dinner, not far out to the promenade in front of the hotel, which had the particular energy of a place that is never quiet and never fully stops. People moved in all directions. There was music from somewhere, 3 competing sources actually, which was very Las Vegas. She had her notebook in her bag and her hands in her pockets. He walked with the loose, unhurried gait of a man who is thinking about something else. Can I ask you something personal? She said. He looked at the lights ahead of them. Yes, he said. Your wife? A pause. I've seen her on Fifton. Olivia from BD. Is that... He waited. Is that your Olivia? There was a slight tremor in the air between them. He was aware of having to be completely honest here, not because of obligation, but because anything else would be a different kind of lie. Yes, he said. She absorbed this. She doesn't know we're on this trip together. She knows I'm in Las Vegas. She doesn't know it's with a colleague who... She stopped. Who what? She looked at the lights. Who thinks highly of you? He let that sit for a moment without answering it directly. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Do you think that's a problem? She was quiet for a few steps. I think it could become one. What would it take for it to become one? She looked at him then. He met her eyes. Something I'm not going to do, she said. They kept walking. The lights reflected off the pavement. Somewhere ahead, a crowd had gathered around a street performer. The crowd laughed, scattered, reformed. Why aren't you going to do something about it? He said. He asked it directly because he thought she deserved a direct question and would give an honest answer. She thought about it for what felt like a genuine amount of time, not a pause for effect. Because the thing I like about you is the thing that would disappear, she said. If you were someone who could be moved off course, you wouldn't be the person I'm interested in. She put her hands back in her pockets. You're loyal, completely. That's rare. A beat. I'm not interested in someone who stops being rare because I happen to be there. He looked ahead. That's very clear thinking, he said. I've been practicing it since dinner, she said. He almost smiled. They turned around and walked back toward the hotel. Are you in love with her? Chloe asked. The question came simply the way difficult questions come from people who have already decided to be honest. He took his phone out of his pocket, opened the screen. His wallpaper was a photo taken the previous summer, he and Olivia and Sophie at a barbecue. Olivia laughing, head thrown back. Sophie with a watermelon slice. Ethan on the edge of the frame watching both of them. He turned the screen so she could see it. She looked at it for a moment. Every day, he said. Even the days she doesn't particularly like me. She looked at the photo for another second. Then she looked away. Then why are you here? She said. I don't mean Las Vegas. I mean at Meridian, in the office, playing a character. She turned to look at him. You're doing it for her. He put the phone back in his pocket. I'm doing it because the distance got too large, he said, and I didn't build a bridge. She nodded slowly. They reached the hotel entrance. The doorman held the door. She's going to figure it out eventually, Chloe said. She stopped herself. Not because she didn't know the end of the sentence, but because he hadn't told her the end of the sentence, and she respected the deferral. Yeah, he said. She is. Will she be angry? He pressed the elevator button. Probably. Will she understand why? The elevator opened. I hope so, he said. That's what I'm building toward. The doors closed. He called Olivia at 9:30. She answered on the third ring, which meant she'd been awake but doing something else. He could hear the background sound of the television, the particular sound of whatever show she watched in the evenings, the one with the complicated family drama that Sophie called Mom's Crying Show. Hey, she said. Hey. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed. How was your day? Fine. Karen's coming over Saturday for brunch. That's good. Sophie did well at swim practice. She told me. A pause. Olivia turned the TV down. He heard the volume drop. How's Vegas? She said. Loud. He said. The facility visit was good, though. What are you doing there again? Harrington, electronics. Distribution campaign. We need to understand how the operation actually works before we build the story around it. That makes sense. A pause. Did you eat? Yeah, hotel restaurant. With your colleague? Chloe, yes. He kept his voice level. Not evasive, not over-informative. She's the editor on the project. Is she good? Very good. Another pause. Something working underneath the surface of Olivia's voice that he couldn't quite name. Ethan, she said. Yeah. You seem different lately. She said it slowly, like she was deciding to say it even as she was saying it. At home. You seem like you're paying attention to things. I always pay attention. I know, but it's different now. It's like you're... She stopped. I don't know. I can't describe it. Try, he said. A longer pause. Like you're watching something unfold, she said finally. Like you know something is going to happen and you're waiting for it. He sat with that for a moment. Maybe I'm just glad to be in a room with people, he said. I was in the basement for a long time. She made a small sound. Not agreement exactly. More like something landing. I shouldn't have said that, she said. The thing I said, that you needed a real job. He didn't fill the silence. I was frustrated, she said. And I said the unkind version of what I meant. What was the kind version? She was quiet for a moment. He heard her shift on whatever she was sitting on. That I wanted to understand what you were doing. That I was tired of not being able to explain it to myself, let alone anyone else. That's a different thing, he said. I know. A beat. I'm sorry. He let that settle. It's okay, he said. Is it? He thought about the kitchen, the argument, the way she'd looked when she'd said the word embarrassed. Not cruel, not contemptuous, just tired, just worn down into honesty. Yeah, he said. It's okay. She breathed slowly. He heard the television sound go up slightly, not because she'd turned it up, but because he'd learned the acoustics of their bedroom well enough to know she'd shifted positions. Come home soon, she said. Friday, he said. Good. A pause. I ordered the pasta stuff so you can make it this weekend. The one Sophie likes. The one with the peppers. He looked at the Las Vegas ceiling. Okay, he said. Okay, a beat. Good night. Good night, Olivia. After he hung up, he sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. He was 40 years old. He was in a hotel room in Las Vegas while his wife watched television in their bedroom and his daughter had finished swim practice. And tomorrow he would go back to a distribution center and ask a woman named Carla what she was proud of and build a story around the answer. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He lay down and closed his eyes. Back in the office on the third day of the Vegas visit, they'd driven to Henderson for a second session with the facility. Chloe was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. Not withdrawn, just settled. Like she'd arrived somewhere and stopped needing to move. At lunch, she said, "Can I tell you something without it being weird?" "You can try," he said. "I've been editing videos for 7 years. I've worked with a lot of people." She looked at her food. "I've never worked with someone who thinks the way you think. About structure, about story. I've been learning things without you realizing you were teaching them." "I've been learning too," he said. "From me. From watching you work." He meant it. "You have a feel for pacing that's better than most people I know, and I know a lot of editors." She looked up. "The Carla footage," he said. "The cuts you were making in the hotel last night, I could see the shape of what you were building. You were creating time where there wasn't any." "That's what editing is," she said. "Most people think editing is about removing things," he said. "You already know it's about shaping time. That's a distinction that matters." She was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "Whoever you are." She stopped. "What?" "I think you know what I mean." He looked at her steadily. "Give it time," he said. She nodded. And they finished lunch without saying anything more about it. And when they walked back to the facility for the afternoon session, something between them had changed. Not in the direction of complication, but in the direction of clarity. Two people who understood the shape of something and chose not to make it into something else. That was its own kind of maturity. Jason had been busy while they were away. Ethan discovered this on the Friday he returned via Priya, who met him in the corridor with an expression that had something compressed about it. "I need to show you something," she said. She took him to her office and showed him an email chain. Jason had contacted Harrington Electronics directly, not through proper client channels, but through a LinkedIn message to their marketing VP proposing himself as an alternative creative lead if the campaign direction didn't align with their original vision. The Harrington 5P had forwarded the message to Priya. Priya had forwarded it to Marcus Webb at the partner network, whose email at the top of the chain said simply, "Do not touch this situation. I'll advise." Ethan read the email chain twice, then he set it down. "He went around you," Priya said. "Yes, and around the client relationship protocols." "Yes." He looked at the email one more time. "What did Marcus say when you spoke to him?" Priya blinked. "You know Marcus Webb." The question landed quietly. He could feel the edge of it. "I've come across his work," Ethan said. "He's well regarded." Priya looked at him for a moment, the same look she'd given him after the Morrison win. The look that was just half a step short of asking the right question. "He said to let things develop naturally," she said. "That's good advice." "Is it?" She crossed her arms. "Jason just tried to poach a client." "I know. Doesn't that bother you?" He thought about it. "It tells me what Jason is afraid of," he said. "That's more useful than being bothered." Priya looked at him. The expression on her face was a specific combination of things that Ethan recognized as a person processing information that was making them revise a theory. "You knew he was going to do something like this," she said. He said nothing. "You said last week when he took credit for the Morrison strategy, you said you were going to watch what he did next." You already knew. He held her gaze without confirming it. Who are you? She said. Senior creative consultant, he said. E. Walker. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Marcus is coming in next week, she said. He's doing a quarterly visit. I know, Ethan said, and caught himself. I assumed he would given the timeline. Priya stared at him. All right, she said finally. We'll leave Jason for now. Thank you, he said. But Ethan... She stopped, caught the slip. E. Yes. Whatever's happening, whatever you're building toward here, I need you to know I'm keeping track. He nodded. I'd expect nothing less. He walked back to his desk. On his phone, a text from Jason. We need to talk. He put the phone in his pocket and pulled up the Harrington footage files. The work came first. Everything else could wait. The conversation with Jason happened in the stairwell, not by design. Jason had waited near the exit and fallen in to step beside him when Ethan left for lunch, which was the kind of approach that communicated urgency without quite committing to confrontation. The stairwell was Jason's idea. He held the door. Ethan followed him in. The door swung shut behind them. I know what that email looked like, Jason said immediately. But it wasn't what it looked like. What did it look like? Ethan said. Like I was trying to go around you. Were you? Jason's jaw tightened. The particular jaw tightening of a man who is telling himself he has a principled case. I was protecting the client relationship, he said. You've been here 3 weeks. I've been managing Harrington for 8 months. If the direction goes wrong... The direction is fine, Ethan said. Priya approved it. Harrington approved it, based on a 3-day site visit that... Jason. He kept his voice even. Not warm, not angry, just precise. I'm going to say something and I need you to actually hear it. Jason stopped talking. You're good, Ethan said. Your design work on the Morrison campaign was strong, and your instincts on Harrington's visual identity were right. I used them without telling you I was using them, and that was an oversight on my part. Jason blinked. But... What you did going outside the company to the client, that's not a strategy. That's a risk you took when you were scared, and it tells more about you than it does about me. He held Jason's gaze. If you want to compete on merit, compete on merit. I'll compete back. But if you go around the process again, I'm going to stop managing it quietly and start documenting it. He pushed the stairwell door back open. Think about which one you want, he said, and walked back into the hall. Jason stood in the stairwell for a moment. Then he followed. Marcus Webb arrived on a Tuesday. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, built like someone who had played college sports and hadn't fully stopped. He wore the quiet, expensive kind of clothes that communicated authority without performing it, and he moved through the Meridian office with the ease of a man who had been in this space many times, which of course he had. He greeted Priya. He shook hands with the team. He stopped at Ethan's desk last, and the handshake was firm and brief and contained no acknowledgement of anything other than a professional introduction. Walker, Marcus said. Good to meet you in person, Ethan said. Likewise. A beat. How are you finding things here? Worth the time, Ethan said. Marcus nodded. His face communicated exactly nothing, which was a skill that Ethan had always admired in him. Jason watched this exchange from his desk. He watched Marcus greet Ethan. He watched Marcus move on. He watched the way Priya looked when Marcus mentioned the consultant's work on Morrison, with a kind of careful reverence that didn't quite fit someone's reaction to a 3-week employee. Jason was smart. The problem with smart people was that they eventually saw through things, and the question was always whether they'd see through them correctly or just enough to get in trouble. He watched. He waited. And then that afternoon he started digging. Ethan found out about Jason's investigation on a Thursday. Emma told him. Not directly, she said it as a near aside. The way she said most things that mattered slipped into the space between 2 other sentences so that if he missed it, she could have been talking about something else. Jason spent lunch on his laptop looking through YouTube audit sites. She said, he was searching EW Media Empire, an anonymous YouTube founder, and variations of that for about 45 minutes. Ethan looked at her. You were watching him. I watch everything, she said. It was matter of fact. He didn't find what he was looking for, but he found enough adjacent things that he's building a picture. What kind of picture? I don't know yet. She tucked her hair back. But he texted someone after. Not from his work phone. Personal phone. She paused. He left quickly and walked the block twice, which means he was on a call he didn't want to have in the building. He watched her for a moment. Emma.
Yeah.
Are you telling me this because you want me to know, or because you want something in return? She held his gaze. I'm telling you because I've decided you're worth telling. She shrugged. I haven't figured out yet who you are, but I know you're not doing anything wrong, and Jason doing something wrong to you doesn't sit right with me. He nodded slowly. Thank you. She went back to her desk without another word. He sat with this for a moment. Jason was investigating him. He'd suspected it would happen. He'd had 3 weeks, and the Morrison incident, and the Harrington override, and Marcus's visit there were enough anomalies accumulating that a smart, suspicious person would eventually start pulling on threads. He pulled up his email and sent a brief note to Marcus. One sentence: Jason Merritt is looking into my background. Heads up. Marcus replied in 4 minutes. Also one sentence: I expected it. Let it run. Ethan archived the email and went back to the Harrington cuts. He was 2 days away from something he could feel building toward resolution, not just with the campaign, but with everything. The angle of things was changing. He could feel it the way you feel pressure changes before weather. He just needed to be ready when it arrived. The founder conference announcement came on a Friday afternoon. All company email. Subject line: Annual Meridian Founder Event. Mark your calendars. The body of the email was brief. An annual event attended virtually by all 714 employees across the global network, plus the senior leadership of all 7 companies, plus key partners and clients. Date: 3 weeks away. Format: hybrid, in person and online. Location: the Meridian flagship office, 14th floor. And then the line that made the entire office stop what it was doing. This year, for the first time, our founder, who has led this network from its inception but has never appeared publicly, will address the company in person. The office absorbed this in the particular silence of people who are reading something twice. EW is coming here, Emma said out loud. That's what it says, Chloe said. In person. Emma looked at the email again. No one's ever seen him, the founder, in 15 years. I know. What does he look like? Nobody knows. That's the whole point. Emma scrolled. This is insane. Do you know who? She looked across the office at Priya's glass-walled office. Does Priya know? Priya had to know, Chloe said. She would have been told in advance. Ethan at his desk was looking at the email. He'd written it, dictated it to Marcus, who'd had the events team send it from the corporate communications account. He'd approved the date, the venue, the format, the line about appearing in person. He'd been planning this for 3 weeks. He read the email again. This year, for the first time, our founder will address the company in person. He was the founder. The 14th floor where he sat every day was about to become the place where his family and his company and his concealed self were going to converge in a way that couldn't be undone. He closed the email and looked at the Harrington timeline on his second monitor. He had 3 weeks. He had work to do. That evening, he drove home with the particular feeling of a man who has set something in motion and is now simply watching it travel toward its destination. Not anxiety, not excitement exactly, something more like readiness. Sophie was still up when he got home. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop working on something for school. She looked up when he came in. You're later than usual, she said. Big email went out at work today. What kind of email? He sat down across from her. Company event. Annual founder conference. She went back to her laptop. Is that exciting? It might be, he said. She typed something, deleted it, typed it again. Dad? She didn't look up.
Yeah.
Madison's mom asked my mom about you today. At school pickup. He waited. She asked what you did. Mom said you were in digital media, content development. She paused. She said it like she meant it. He sat with that for a moment. Did that feel different? He said. Sophie looked up at him. She had Olivia's eyes, the same dark, direct gaze, the same quality of attention that felt like it didn't miss much. Yeah, she said. They sat at the table for another 10 minutes quietly, while she finished her homework and he looked at the kitchen around him. The kitchen he'd designed. The pasta pot on the hook. The basil plant on the windowsill slightly overgrown that he kept meaning to trim. He was building toward something. He could feel the weight of it from the inside. The 3 weeks between the announcement and the founder conference were the most peculiar of Ethan's career. He had spent 15 years building something in the dark, meticulously, patiently, with the kind of focus that required him to be largely invisible to clients, to audiences, to the world that valued visible success. He had built in the dark, not because he was ashamed, but because he had always understood from the first channel and the first script that attention was a currency and he would spend it carefully or he would spend it foolishly. He had spent it carefully, And now in 3 weeks, he was going to spend it. He went through those weeks doing what he'd been doing. Working at his desk on 14, contributing to the Harrington campaign, reviewing the global network's quarterly performance with Marcus and encrypted calls from the basement at home. He drove Sophie to school. He made breakfast. He let Olivia adjust to the version of him that she was starting slowly, unevenly, in the way of things that have been calcified for years, beginning to soften at the edges to find interesting. She didn't know who she was finding interesting. That remained the central thing he carried. Jason got his answer on the 14th day. He'd hired someone, a freelance researcher who specialized in media company audits, the kind of person who could trace corporate structures and holding companies through public filings. It had cost Jason what was likely a meaningful amount of his own money, which told Ethan something about how badly Jason wanted certainty. The researcher had found the holding company, had found the DBA filings, had found the connection between the partner network, the corporate entity, and the name attached to both, and had delivered to Jason 4 days before the founder conference a digital folder containing enough evidence to make the connection explicit. Ethan Walker, founder Meridian Media and 6 sister companies. Jason had read it at his desk. Ethan watching from across the open floor plan, with the peripheral attention he deployed so naturally, it felt like breathing saw the color change in Jason's face. The sequence of it disbelief recalculation, something that looked very much like the particular nausea of realizing you have behaved badly towards someone with more power than you understood. Jason had looked at Ethan's desk. Ethan had been looking at his screen. Then Jason had stood up and walked to Priya's office. He'd closed Priya's door. Ethan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see through the glass Jason talking, Priya listening. Priya's face not changing because she already knew. The moment Jason realized Priya already knew. The moment Jason understood that his investigation had yielded a discovery that everyone in leadership had already been navigating. Then Jason had said something that made Priya hold up one hand, and she'd picked up the phone on her desk, and Ethan knew from the way she held it, the particular posture of deference she reserved for people above her in the hierarchy, that she was calling Marcus. He heard Marcus's voice through the phone from across the office, even though he couldn't make out words. He saw Jason hear it. He saw Jason hear, "Do not touch him." He saw Jason ask through the glass, "Why?" And he saw Priya relay whatever Marcus said next, and he saw Jason's face when it arrived. Because he's the one paying all our salaries. Jason walked out of Priya's office slowly. He crossed the floor. He stood at the edge of Ethan's desk. Ethan looked up. "I'm sorry," Jason said. He said it quietly. Not performing it. Not building toward anything. Just 2 words in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. "The Morrison thing," he said. "And the Harrington contact. He stopped. "I didn't understand the situation." "I know you didn't," Ethan said. "I thought you were—" Jason stopped again. "I don't know what I thought." "You thought I was a 40-year-old man starting over," Ethan said. "And you decided that meant you could be unkind." Jason looked at the floor. Not performing shame, just experiencing it. "I'm sorry," he said again. Ethan looked at him for a moment. At the 28-year-old who had been the sharpest person in every room before this one. At the person who had spent 3 weeks trying to manage something he didn't understand rather than asking a question. "You're talented," Ethan said. "That's true. The work you've done on visual identity for the Harrington campaign is something I'm going to use." A beat. "But talent is the minimum. What you do with it, that's the actual work." Jason nodded. "We good," Ethan said. A long moment. "Yeah," Jason said. "We're good." He walked back to his desk. Emma from across the room looked at Ethan and gave him a single precise nod. He returned it.
But
3 days before the conference, Olivia came to his desk. Not as Olivia Walker, his wife. Still technically as Olivia Walker from business development on 15. The desk conversations had become a pattern. Over the weeks she would find reasons to be on 14, would stop by, would say something about the work, and they would talk for a few minutes. It had become the most honest communication they'd had in 3 years. The irony of this was not lost on him. Today she sat in the chair beside the desk and said, "Have you seen the all-company email about the founder conference?" "Yes," he said. "EW is going to appear in person." She shook her head slightly. "I've been at Meridian for 2 years and no one has ever seen this person. No one knows what he looks like." "Do you know anything about him?" He kept his face still. "A little." She looked at him. "Like what?" "Like he started from nothing, built the whole network over 15 years mostly without anyone knowing who he was. Content production distribution. He understood the internet before most people understood the internet. She was quiet for a moment. Why the anonymity? He considered the answer carefully. Because the work is the thing, not the person behind it. He didn't want the story to be about him. He wanted it to be about what he was building. She absorbed this. That's either very principled or very lonely. Probably both, he said. She looked at the wall above his desk, where, if this were his office properly, he might have hung some of those play buttons. What's he like in person? He almost said something that would have ended the conversation. Instead, I don't know yet. I've only seen him from a distance. She nodded. She was looking at him with the expression he'd been watching develop over the past month, that particular quality of attention that came from someone rediscovering a shape they had forgotten. My husband is in content, she said. She said it differently than she had in the early weeks. Not apologetically, not as a piece of information to be explained, just as a fact she was comfortable with. He's been building something for years and I didn't understand what it was. Do you understand now? He said. Better. She looked at her hands. Not completely, but better. A pause. He's been working in an office lately. Has been for about a month. He seems, I don't know, less invisible. That's good, Ethan said. It's strange, she said. It's like he's the same person, but I'm finally seeing him clearly. Like I had the wrong focal length for a long time. He said nothing, just looked at her. Anyway, she stood up, brushing her blazer smooth. The conference should be interesting. Yes, he said. It should. She walked toward the staircase. He watched her go. Wrong focal length. He thought about that for a long time. The morning of the founder conference was ordinary. Ethan woke at 5, made coffee, stood at the window. The oak tree outside was moving slightly in an early wind, and the morning was the particular gray-blue of late autumn in the city, and he stood with his cup and looked at it and thought about nothing specifically. He drove Sophie to school. You're quiet, she said in the car. I have something big at work today, he said. She looked at him. What kind of big? A presentation, he said, to a lot of people. She considered this. Are you nervous? No, he said, and meant it. She nodded slowly. Good. At the school entrance, she opened the door and then stopped. She sat there for a moment with her hand on the door frame. Dad, she said. Yeah, I looked up Meridian Media last night. She said it carefully, looking at the school entrance rather than at him. Just for something to say when people ask where you work. And I looked at their corporate page, and there was a picture of a play button they have in the lobby. She paused. The same kind you have in the basement. He was very still. I didn't look anything else up, she said. I thought maybe I should let you tell me. A long moment. You should, he said. Tonight if you want. Come to the basement. She nodded, got out of the car, walked 3 steps, then turned back. I've always known you were good at what you do, she said. I just forgot to say it out loud. She turned and went into school. He sat in the parking lane for a full minute before he drove away. The 14th floor at 9 a.m. was different from its usual self. Someone had arranged chairs, not many 30 or 40 set, facing a temporary stage area near the north windows. On the monitors around the office, a video feed was already active, the conference interface showing an auditorium-style view, the online attendees filling in. Ethan could see the counter in the corner of one screen. 847 attendees connected and rising. He sat at his desk. He looked like he always looked. Navy sweater, dark jeans, the clothes of a man who dressed for the work, not the occasion. People were arriving, Priya brisk and managing simultaneously visible and invisible anxiety. Emma, who had done her hair differently and then appeared not to have noticed. Jason, who looked at Ethan when he came in with the specific expression of someone calibrating exactly what they were witnessing. Olivia came down from 15. He'd known she would. The all-company notice had encouraged attendance from all floors. She came in at 9:20, holding her coffee still in her work blazer, and found a seat near the middle of the arranged chairs. She didn't look at Ethan's desk. She was talking to a colleague angled away. Chloe arrived last, settling at her editing station, and glanced at Ethan across the floor. He met her gaze. She nodded once, the kind of nod that meant, I see what's happening. I'm with you. He nodded back. Marcus Webb took the room at 9:45. He did it the way he always did everything, without announcing himself, simply arriving at the front of the space and waiting for attention to migrate to him. By the time people became aware that he was standing there, the room was already orienting toward him. Good morning, he said. I'll be brief before I hand things over. The monitor behind him showed a global feed employees tuned in from Auckland, London, Lagos, São Paulo, Singapore. The counter read 1,127 attendees. Meridian Media and the network it belongs to has been operating for 15 years, Marcus said. In that time, we've built something that most people in this industry told us couldn't be built. 40 channels, 7 companies, 214 full-time employees, audiences in the tens of millions. He paused. It was built by one person who understood from the very beginning that the best structures are the ones that outlast the person who built them. He looked at the room. That person has been in this building for the past 5 weeks, he said. Most of you have already met him. A silence. Ethan watched the room adjust. He watched Priya smile very slightly. He watched Emma's head turn. He watched Jason go very still. He watched Olivia's face. She was frowning slightly the way she did when she was processing something that didn't quite fit. Her eyes had moved with everyone else's toward the front of the room, and then in the way of a brain completing a pattern, it has been assembling without knowing it. Very, very slowly, they moved. To his desk. He was already looking at her when she found him. He held her gaze. Something moved across her face that he didn't have a word for. Not a single emotion. A sequence. Disbelief first. Then the particular quality of disbelief that comes from the moment the impossible thing is recognized as true. Then something faster and harder. The rapid, non-linear recalculation of 2 years of context, of 100 small moments rearranging themselves in real time, of every conversation and every look and every corridor encounter finding its actual meaning. He watched all of this cross her face in about 4 seconds. Then Marcus said, "Please welcome the founder of Meridian Media and the EW Network, Ethan Walker." And Ethan stood up. He didn't walk to a stage. He stood up from his desk. The desk where he'd been sitting for 5 weeks. The desk where he'd revised the Morrison campaign and read the Harrington brief and talked to Olivia about story and watched his whole company from the inside for the first time in 15 years. He stood up and the room stood with him. Not immediately. The way rooms do this, one person rising, then another, then the understanding reaching across the space. Marcus was standing. Priya was standing. People who understood what they were witnessing were standing. And then because they were all employees of the same company and understood in some essential way the scale of what they'd just been told, the room stood. Not applause, he had specified no applause, and Marcus had honored it, just the room coming to its feet. He looked around it. He looked at Jason standing with the particular expression of a man who has had a very informative month. He looked at Emma, who had her arms crossed and was giving him the specific look of someone who was deeply annoyed at having been right and not known why. He looked at Chloe, who was not standing because she was already at the edge of the room, leaning against the wall, watching him with a quiet smile that held no possession and no claim, and nothing but the clean, uncomplicated pleasure of having understood something correctly. And then he looked at Olivia. She was standing. She was standing and she was not crying. She was too still for that, too. Inside herself, and her face was doing something complicated that he knew he would spend a long time understanding. He didn't look away from her. He let her see him fully. The first time she had actually seen him in how long? Longer than he wanted to admit. He turned to the monitor behind him. "Thank you all for being here," he said. His voice was the same voice it always was. The same voice he used in the morning to tell Sophie breakfast was ready. The same voice he'd used at the whiteboard with the Morrison brief. No announcement in it, no performance. "I'm not going to give a long speech," he said. "I've spent 15 years doing the work quietly, and I prefer to continue that way." He looked at the room. "What I will say is this. Everything we've built, the network, the company, the catalog, the reach, none of it was built in a boardroom. It was built in a basement, on a laptop, with a microphone and an understanding of what it means to tell a story that someone actually wants to hear." He paused. "The people in this room, in this building, on this call are the reason it works, not me. I write structures. You fill them. Remember that." He looked at Marcus, who gave him the smallest of nods. "That's all I have," Ethan said. "Marcus will handle the operations review. I'll be available for the rest of the morning if anyone wants to talk." He looked at the room one more time. "Thank you for coming in." He sat back down. Marcus continued with the program, and the room slowly returned to its orientation, still changed. Still different, but settling into the new shape of things. Ethan pulled up the Harrington final cut on his screen. He started reviewing it. He was still the same man. Olivia walked out of the room before the operations review finished. He saw it from his periphery, the abrupt rising, the turn, the exit through the stairwell door. Not dramatic. She didn't make a scene. She simply left, and he let her go because he knew what she needed right now was not him. She needed time. He gave it to her. He stayed for the full 2 hours. He answered questions from people who came to his desk, mostly senior team members, carefully, respectfully, the way you approach someone you're recalibrating your understanding of. He answered the questions without ceremony. He was the same person he'd been for 5 weeks. He wasn't going to become someone else simply because his name was now attached to what he'd built. Chloe came last. The room had mostly cleared. The monitors had gone back to regular display. The chairs were being stacked by the facilities team. She sat in the chair beside his desk, the same chair Olivia had sat in many times over the past weeks. "So," she said. "So," he said. "You're the founder." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "The basement," she said. "You told me on the first day in Vegas you said you'd been building from a basement for 15 years, and I wrote it down." She looked up. "I should have put it together then." "You had no reason to." "I like to think I was close." She almost smiled. 40 channels, gold and diamond play buttons, 200 employees. She shook her head. "Your wife doesn't know." "She knows now," he said. "How is she?" He looked toward the stairwell door. "Processing," he said. Chloe nodded. "Is she going to be all right?" "She's going to be a lot of things before she's all right," he said. "But yes, eventually." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell you something." "Okay." "The thing I said in Las Vegas about why I wasn't going to do something." She met his eyes. "I meant it. But I also want to say I'm glad I met you. Whatever this was, the month, the work, the way you think about things. It's been good for me." "For me too," he said, and meant it. "I hope things work out." She stood. "With Olivia. With your family." "Thank you," he said. She walked to the door, then stopped. "E.W.," she said without turning. "Ethan Walker." She said it slowly, like the letters settling into their proper shape. "It's a good way to hide." "It was never hiding," he said. "It was building." She turned and looked at him one last time. "I know," she said. "I believe you." She left. He found Olivia in the parking structure at 12:30. He'd known she wouldn't leave the building entirely. He'd known because he knew her, because 18 years of marriage, even when it was failing, left you with the map of a person's patterns. She went to the parking structure when she was thinking. When she needed to be somewhere, nobody would look for her. She was standing beside her car. Not sitting in it. Standing beside it with her arms crossed, and the particular posture of a person who has been standing there long enough that the position has become default. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. She didn't say anything right away. He walked to within a few feet of her and stopped. "You lied to me," she said. The words were quiet. Not an accusation from rage, from something more fundamental. "No," he said. "You came to work here and you didn't tell me. I never told you I was a content creator taking a desk job at a random company," he said. "I said I was going to work in an office. I did that." "You knew I worked here." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "No." He kept his voice level. "I didn't." She looked at him. "Why?" He thought about how to answer this. He'd had weeks to prepare, but preparation didn't make it simpler. "Because if I'd told you before you'd seen it yourself," he said, "you would have adjusted. You would have processed it differently. You would have put me back in a category before you'd had the chance to actually see me. That's not fair." "It's not about fair," he said. "It's about what was true." He met her eyes. "You didn't know me, Olivia. You knew a version of me that you'd constructed from what you could see. And what you could see was a man in a basement doing something you couldn't explain to your friends." Her jaw tightened. "You told me you were embarrassed," he said. "Not because you didn't love me, because you couldn't see what I was building. I couldn't see it because you never showed me. I tried." "You were in a basement." Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. "For years. Not a little. Every day. I'd come home and you'd be downstairs and I had no idea." She stopped. "How was I supposed to know?" "You could have asked," he said. The silence between them was very old. "I know," she said. "I know I could have asked." Her arms dropped from her chest. "I stopped asking because I was afraid the answer was going to be something I couldn't." She looked at the concrete floor of the parking structure. "I thought if I asked directly, and the answer was that it wasn't working, I'd have to face it." She looked up. "I thought not asking was protecting us." He was very still. "It wasn't," she said. I know that now. I wasn't asking you, I was avoiding you, and I told myself it was the same thing. She pressed her hand flat against the car hood. And then I told you I was embarrassed to introduce you to people, and God, Ethan. It's okay, he said. It's not okay. You were telling me the truth, he said. It wasn't kind, but it was honest, and I needed to hear it. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. I never asked about the basement, she said. 15 years. I never actually asked what you were building. No, he said. I want to know, she said. I want you to tell me everything. He looked at her. At the woman he'd fallen in love with at 22 in a car driving 6 hours to a concert they couldn't afford better seats for. At the woman who had laughed unselfconsciously at a magic show and made him fall further. At the woman who had become someone he could no longer reach through a distance they had both contributed to in different ways. Come home at 5, he said. I'll take you downstairs. I'll show you everything. She nodded. She put a hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she lowered it. Ethan, she said. Yeah. I'm sorry I said I was embarrassed. I know you are. And She stopped. I'm proud of you. I don't know how to say that without it sounding. It doesn't sound like anything, he said. It just sounds like you. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and got in her car. He stood in the parking structure and watched her drive toward the exit. And he thought about what she'd said. I thought not asking was protecting us. And he understood it. He understood it because he'd made the same mistake in a different direction. He'd thought not showing her was protecting the thing he'd built. They'd both been wrong. That was somehow a better place to start from than either of them being wrong alone. He went back upstairs. He sat at his desk for the rest of the afternoon. At 4:15, his phone showed a text from Sophie. Dad. I looked it up. I'm sorry I said you were hiding. He typed back, you already said that this morning. Then another from Sophie, I know. I just needed to say it again. He put the phone down. He kept working until 5. The drive home was 15 minutes longer than usual. There was no traffic reason for it. He took a different route, not longer in distance, just in time, driving through neighborhoods he hadn't been through in years. Past the building where they'd lived in their first apartment. Past the park where he'd pushed Sophie in a stroller on Saturday mornings when she was 2, walking for an hour so that Olivia could sleep. Past the coffee shop that used to be a different coffee shop, where he and Olivia had argued about everything from apartment layouts to what to name the baby. The earnest, alive arguments of two people who were building a life and had not yet learned that the building was harder than the planning. He drove past all of it. Then he took the highway home. Olivia's car was in the driveway. He went inside. She was sitting at the kitchen island, not working, not on her phone, just sitting. There was a cup of tea in front of her, and she had her hands wrapped around it. And when he came in, she looked up with the expression of someone who has been thinking for a long time and has arrived somewhere. Sophie's at swim, she said. I know. He sat down across from her. They sat for a moment in the kind of silence that was different from the silences of the last 3 years. Not avoidant, not pressurized, just present. Tell me, she said, from the beginning. He started from the beginning. He told her about the first channel, the first microphone, the apartment, the laptop, the 2 AM exports, and the forum communities where he'd learned what audiences actually wanted versus what content creators assumed they wanted. He told her about the first 1,000 subscribers, which had taken 11 months, and the first 50,000, which had taken 8 months after that, and the way the compound growth had felt less like success and more like the sudden visibility of something that had always been there. He told her about the year he'd made $30,000, about the year he'd made $300,000, about the year the first corporate inquiry had come in, and he'd looked at it and understood for the first time that what he'd built was not just a content library, but infrastructure, a replicable structure for audience development that worked across categories. He told her about the decision to stay anonymous, not because he was afraid of visibility, but because he'd watched enough visible people in the industry get swallowed by their own presence. The person became the brand became a liability. He had wanted the work to survive him. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She held her tea and she looked at him, and she was the most attentive he could remember her being in longer than he could immediately calculate. When he finished 45 minutes, the full 15 years, she was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell me? She said, even at the beginning. Because at the beginning it was too small to seem real, he said. And then it grew, and I was afraid you'd think I'd been hiding something. And then it grew more, and He stopped. You were embarrassed, she said. He looked at her. The other way around, she said. You were embarrassed to tell me how big it had gotten because by then it had been so long. He nodded slowly. Something like that. She looked at her hands. We were both keeping things from each other. We were both protecting something that needed air, he said, not protection. She pressed her lips together, something working underneath her face that was not yet ready to become language. Oh, come on, he said. He stood up. Come see it. He took her to the basement. The play buttons caught the light when he turned the overheads on. All 17 of them. Gold and diamond. The channel names on their bases. The subscriber counts, the ones she would now find believable. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at them. Then she walked in. She walked to the shelves and stood close to the frames, close enough to read the names. Her eyes moved across them methodically, the way she processed things, left to right. He watched her. She put her finger on one frame, a gold play button, the earliest one he'd kept. When is this from? She said. 2013, he said. She turned to look at him. We'd been married 2 years. Yes? She turned back to the wall, kept looking. The monitors, she said. I review performance data every morning, before you make breakfast. The calls you take. She glanced at him. The ones you take in the basement. Mostly my COO. Sometimes our head writer. Sometimes a studio director. She stood very still. 40 channels, she said. Yes. 7 companies? Yes. 200 people. 214. She put her hand on one of the shelves, not leaning on it, just touching it the way you touch something when you need it to be real. I walked through this room, she said. I've been through this room. A lot of times. And I saw these and I didn't... She stopped. I didn't ask what they were. No, he said. That's Ethan. That's mine too. That's my mistake as much as... It's not about fault, he said. Not now. She looked at him from across the basement. The room that had been invisible to her for 15 years. That had been generating quietly the infrastructure of their life. It's not about fault, she repeated, as if testing the weight of it. We can do that later if you want, he said. There's plenty of time. He watched her face. Right now I just wanted you to see it. She looked at the wall of play buttons again. It's a lot, she said. I know. I need... She stopped, started again. I need time. I know, he said. Take what you need. She nodded. She crossed the basement and walked past him toward the stairs. At the foot of the stairs, she stopped. You never lied, she said without turning around. No, he said. But you didn't tell me the truth either. No, he said. I didn't. A moment. We're going to need to talk about this, she said. Not tonight, but soon. For a long time. I know, he said. I've been waiting for it. She went upstairs. He stayed in the basement for a while. He looked at the play buttons on the wall and the monitors on the desk and the acoustic panels and the microphone in the 15 years that lived in this room. Then he turned off the light and went upstairs. The first thing Olivia did the morning after the conference was call her sister. Ethan heard this through the kitchen ceiling. Olivia's voice, low and controlled in the bedroom above. He couldn't make out the words, but he could read the cadence of it. The slow beginning, the acceleration, the one long pause that meant her sister had said something that landed. Then the ending, which was quiet again, and Olivia's footsteps as she moved to the bathroom and then came downstairs. She looked like herself. That was always how she looked when she was processing something large exactly like herself, because there was no energy left for any other performance. Do you want coffee? He said. Please. He poured a cup. She sat at the island. He set the cup in front of her. They didn't speak right away. He went back to making breakfast. Eggs? The good bread Sophie liked, the seeded kind from the bakery on Elm Street. The movements of a morning he had done 10,000 times. I called my sister, Olivia said. I heard. She wants to meet you. Again, I mean, she said... She stopped. She said she'd suspected you were doing well and wondered why I'd never noticed. He kept his eyes on the pan. Your sister has always been observant, he said. She has. A pause. I used to think it was annoying. He turned off the burner. I made an appointment, Olivia said. He turned around. A therapist, she said. For me, individually. I'm not saying couples yet. I think I need to understand my own part of this first before I can... She looked at her cup. Before I can be useful in a joint conversation. He looked at her. That's a mature thing to do, he said. It's the obvious thing to do. I should have done it 3 years ago. She looked up at him. I've been running on social comparison for so long, I don't even know what I actually think anymore. Karen's husband, Madison's dad. I've been measuring your life against other men's lives, and the measuring doesn't even come from me. It comes from... She pressed her palm flat on the counter. I don't know where it comes from. That's what I need to find out. He moved to the island and sat across from her. I want to say something, he said, and I need you to hear it without attaching any weight to it either direction. She looked at him. You weren't wrong to feel frustrated, he said. You were wrong about what you were frustrated with. But the frustration itself, the feeling that there was a gap between us, that you couldn't reach me, that the life we'd built had gone quiet in a way that wasn't comfortable, you were right to feel all of that. She was very still. I built something enormous, he said, and I never brought you into it. I told myself it was because I was protecting you from the pressure and the uncertainty. But some of it, not all of it, but some of it was that I'd built a world where I knew exactly what I was doing and how it worked, and I was afraid to let you see it and have you disagree with it. Her eyes didn't leave his. I was afraid you'd think it wasn't real, he said, or that it wasn't enough, or that it was something to be embarrassed by. He paused. And then you said you were embarrassed, and I realized I'd been right to be afraid, but I'd been right for the wrong reasons. It wasn't the work you were embarrassed by. It was the silence. She put her hand over her mouth for a moment. We're so bad at this, she said. We are, he agreed. Is that fixable? He looked at her. Do you want it to be? She didn't pause before answering. Yes. Then yes, he said. It's fixable. She nodded. She picked up her coffee with both hands. This is going to take a long time, she said. I have time, he said. She looked at him. How much time? Because if you're running 7 companies and 200 people, you're... Olivia. He waited for her to stop. I've been running 7 companies for 8 years, and every morning I was downstairs and back up in time to make breakfast. Time has never been the problem. She absorbed this, something moving across her face that was not quite a smile. No, she said. I suppose it hasn't been. Sophie came home from school to find her parents sitting at the kitchen table, both with coffee talking, not arguing. Not the particular loaded silence of parents pretending they haven't been arguing. Talking. She stood in the doorway with her backpack for a moment looking at this. Hey, Bug, her father said. Hey. She came in, set the backpack down carefully. What are you guys doing? Talking, her mother said. About what? A look between her parents, not a concealing look, but a considering one. About us, her father said, and the basement. Sophie looked at him for a moment, then at her mother. Then she went to the cabinet and got a glass for water. Mom told you she knows, she said. I was there when she found out, Ethan said. We went through it together. Sophie filled her glass, drank some of it, turned around and leaned against the counter. So I can ask questions, she said. Yes, he said. Like any questions. Yes, das bien. She thought for a moment. 14-year-olds thought with their whole face when they forgot to guard it. The gold things in the basement, she said. How many subscribers is gold? 100,000, he said. And diamond? 10 million. Sophie looked at the wall, then back at him. You have diamond ones, she said. Several. That's... She stopped. She was processing in the same way Olivia had processed, left to right, reel to reel. That's a lot. Yes, he said. Why didn't you tell us? The question was not accusatory, just honestly curious. The kind of question 14-year-olds asked when they were really asking it. Because I didn't know how, he said. And then I waited too long and it kept getting harder. She nodded. This was a phenomenon she understood. She had a fight with a friend from 5th grade that she'd never resolved for exactly the same reason. Are you going to stay working at Meridian? She said. For a while, he said. It's my company. I should understand it. And you'll still work in the basement. Yes. But the door can be open. He looked at her. The basement door, she said. You always had it closed. Yes, he said. The door can be open. She nodded. She picked up her backpack. I'm going to start a YouTube channel, she said as she was leaving the kitchen. Okay, he said. Can you help me? Yes. Cool. She was already in the hallway. Can we talk about it at dinner? We can talk about it at dinner, he said. He heard her on the stairs. He looked at Olivia. Olivia was looking at the space where Sophie had been. She's remarkable, Olivia said. She's yours, he said. She's yours too. Olivia looked at him. She's been yours the whole time, even when I was making it hard for her to show it. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand for a moment. Then she put hers in it. They sat like that until dinner. The first few months were not a movie. There was no single conversation that resolved everything. There were many conversations, some of them circular, some of them unfinished, some of them returning to the same ground they'd covered and finding it slightly less difficult each time. Olivia went to her therapist weekly. She came home from those appointments quiet sometimes, and processing sometimes, and once or twice visibly upset not at Ethan, but at herself, at something she'd said or remembered or understood for the first time. He let all of it be what it was. He did not rush her. He made breakfast. He drove Sophie to school. He went to work at Meridian for 3 more months before transitioning to a hybrid arrangement that let him spend more time at home. The basement door stayed open most mornings, and if Olivia passed by on her way to the kitchen, she would sometimes look in, and sometimes she wouldn't, and gradually looking in became normal. The Saturday 3 weeks after the conference, he took her to the basement properly. Not to show her, to explain it. He sat at the desk and walked her through the dashboard. Not the numbers, not the business metrics, but the actual work. The script review process. The hook structure. The way he could look at a piece of content and understand within 10 minutes why it was or wasn't connecting. She asked questions. Good ones. Sharp ones the way her questions had always been when she was engaged with something rather than managing something. This channel, she said, pointing at one of the screens. The drama one. This is the most subscribed, one of the top 3. The stories on this one, she leaned closer. They're really long, like 40-minute videos. 60 some of them. People watch hour-long drama stories on YouTube. Women 45 and older, he said. It's a massive underserved market. They want narrative. They want emotional complexity. They want stories that don't treat them like they have a 12-second attention span. She looked at the screen for a long moment. I watch things like this, she said. Not this channel specifically, but I watch long drama content. On YouTube sometimes. I know, he said. It was part of how I knew the audience. She turned to look at him. You knew your audience partly from watching me. You and several million other people with similar patterns, he said. But yes, you were part of my research. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was not a soft laugh. It was the unself-conscious one, the laugh from the magic show in Las Vegas. The laugh that was fully itself. She laughed at the absolute strangeness of it. Her husband had spent 15 years building content for an audience he had partly understood through living with her, and she hadn't known, and it was either the funniest thing that had ever happened or the most absurd. Ethan, watching her laugh, felt something unlock in his chest. He started laughing too. They sat in the basement and laughed until it subsided. And then Olivia leaned back in the chair he'd pulled up beside the desk and looked at the ceiling. Ah, what an absolute disaster, she said warmly. Yes, he agreed. We could have talked. For 15 years, we could have just talked. We're talking now. She looked at him. Yes, we are. Sophie launched her YouTube channel in December. She'd spent 4 weeks planning it. The concept, the niche, the visual identity. Ethan had helped when she asked and stayed out of it when she didn't. He'd learned with Sophie that the help she needed was always different from the help that looked like it might be needed, and the only way to know the difference was to wait for her to tell you. She was making content about books, not review something more structural, the way stories were built, the things under the surface that made them work or not work. The logo she'd designed had a small structural element in it, a foundation, a frame that he recognized but didn't comment on. On the day she uploaded her first video, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and the two of them on either side of her watching the view count. The first 100 came in 40 minutes. By midnight, it was 461. She closed the laptop and went to bed without saying anything about the numbers, which he recognized as the exact right instinct. Olivia looked at him after Sophie had gone up. She's going to be better at this than either of us, she said. She already is, he said. Tati. On a Saturday in late January, Ethan came downstairs to find the basement door already open. He'd done it himself the night before, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that there were 2 coffees on the corner of his desk, his regular and one he didn't drink from. He stood in the doorway. Olivia appeared at the top of the stairs. I was looking at the overnight numbers for the drama channel, she said, coming down. The one I watch. He looked at her. Is that okay? She said. Yes, he said. It's your company too. She stopped on the bottom stair. No, it's not. We've been married 20 years. We've been married 18, almost 20, he said. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. You know what I realized in therapy, she said. What? I spent 2 years being embarrassed by something I didn't understand. She came down the last step. And in that same time, I worked at one of your companies and had no idea. which means I benefited from what you built without seeing it. I was using the thing I was dismissing. We don't need to. No, listen. She sat in the chair she'd claimed as hers over the past month. I think about that a lot. What it says about how we see things we're too close to. I didn't see the building because I only looked at the man, and the man was in a basement, and that's all I let myself know. She looked at the play buttons on the wall. I want to understand it, all of it. Not because I feel like I have to make up for something, because it's actually interesting. He looked at her. The drama channel especially, she said. The long-form ones. Why does that format work? What are people actually getting from it? Sit down, he said. I'll show you. She was already sitting. He pulled the desk chair over. He opened the analytics. And Olivia Walker, who had spent 2 years being embarrassed by her husband's work, leaned forward and started asking questions. Chloe was promoted to lead editor in February. Priya made the announcement at a team meeting, and when she did, Ethan was sitting at his usual desk, and Chloe accepted it with the particular economy of motion of a person who had expected it and was not going to perform surprise. After the meeting, she came to his desk. Thank you, she said. You earned it, he said. Entirely. I know. She wasn't being arrogant, just accurate. But I also know that having someone who actually saw what I was doing that mattered. So, thank you. He nodded. How's your family? She said. Better, he said. Slowly, but better. Good. She looked toward the window. Your wife is... She stopped. What? I actually like her, she said. From what I've seen, she's sharp. Yes, he said. She is. Good sharp at getting there. He looked at the screen. She found the overnight analytics last Saturday. Chloe looked at him. On her own. On her own. A smile. Small reel. That's a very good sign. I think so too, he said. She walked back to her station. He turned back to the Harrington deliverables. The campaign had performed exactly as projected. Morrison had renewed. 3 new clients had come in based on the Meridian work. The floor was different now than it had been 6 months ago, not because of the reveal, not because anyone had changed, but because the shape of things was more honest than it had been, and honest things functioned better. He was still the same man. He was still here at this desk doing the same work. He just wasn't doing it in isolation anymore. The basement door stayed open after that. It became the ordinary thing, the default position, the way the kitchen light stayed on after dinner while they cleaned up the way the back door was left unlocked on Saturday mornings. Not a decision any longer, just the way things were. Some mornings, Olivia would come down for the second cup of coffee, the one she hadn't been taking upstairs recently because she'd discovered that the basement in the early morning was quieter than she'd expected. She would sit in the chair she'd claimed and scroll through something on her phone, or read, or ask him a question about something she'd seen in the data. She was learning the vocabulary, slowly with the particular stubbornness of a person who was good at things and wanted to be good at this too. He taught her without teaching her. He answered when she asked. He left things visible that she might find interesting. He stopped managing the distance and let her cross it on her own terms. It was not faster this way. It was better. Sophie came down sometimes too, usually on weekends when she was working on her channel and wanted to think out loud. She would sit at the corner of the desk with her notebook and talk through what she was building, and Ethan would listen and occasionally say something, and she would argue with it or absorb it or write it down. One Saturday morning, all 3 of them were in the basement. Olivia was in her chair, Sophie was at the desk corner, Ethan was standing at the monitors. Nobody was talking, just present. The Sunday light came through the small basement window, the one at ground level looking up at the oak tree that Olivia had wanted removed and eventually stopped mentioning. The light caught the edges of the play buttons on the wall and made them slightly gold. Sophie looked up from her notebook. Dad, she said. Yeah. Can I put a video about this in my channel? About what? About this. You. What you built. Like not the money stuff. Just the idea of it. The hiding thing. She looked at her notebook. Someone building something big in a place where nobody could see it. He looked at her. You could call it whatever you want, she said. I'd change your name, but the idea of it. The thing underneath it. What's the thing underneath it? He said. She thought. That visible doesn't mean valuable, she said. And invisible doesn't mean absent. Olivia in her chair looked up from her phone. Ethan looked at his daughter for a moment. Yes, he said. You can write about that. She bent back to her notebook. The light shifted slightly as the oak tree moved outside. Olivia put her phone down. Invisible doesn't mean absent, she said quietly. Not to either of them. just to the room. She picked up her coffee, drank it. The basement was quiet and warm and full of people who loved each other and were learning slowly how to show it.
But
That spring, Ethan opened the basement studio door before breakfast for the first time without deciding to. He didn't notice until he was halfway up the stairs with his coffee. He'd just left it open, by habit now, the same way he left the kitchen light on. He stood on the stairs for a moment, looking back down at the door. 17 play buttons on the wall, 2 monitors, the acoustic panels, 15 years. The door open. He went upstairs. He made breakfast. He called Sophie's name from the bottom of the stairs and heard her groan and heard her feet hit the floor. He packed her lunch turkey and provolone, no mustard, and apples sliced so it wouldn't brown. He put a note inside the bag. She read it at the kitchen table, which she had started doing again sometime in February. Not every time, but most times. She put it in her pocket. "Come on," she said. "I'm going to be late." "You're never late," he said. "I could be late." He drove her to school. At the entrance, she got out and walked 3 steps, then turned back. "Dad."
yeah,
"The note today?" She looked at the school behind her. "You said the best stories are the ones where something invisible becomes visible." She adjusted her bag. "I'm going to use that." "Okay," he said. "For the channel." "I know." She turned and went in. He sat in the parking lane. He thought about the note he'd written without much thought, the way he wrote the notes, the way he'd been writing them since she was 7. Something true made small enough to fit in a lunchbox. The best stories are the ones where something invisible becomes visible. He drove home. Olivia was at the kitchen island when he got back, laptop open, coffee in hand. She looked up. "She read the note," Ethan said. Olivia smiled, small and real, and the same smile she'd had at 22 in a car driving to a concert. "She always read them," Olivia said, even when she pretended not to. He stood in the kitchen doorway. "I know," he said. "I just needed her to know she could show it." Olivia looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to her laptop. "Come look at this," she said. "The Drama Channel posted a new series overnight. The retention graph is doing something I don't understand." Came into the kitchen. He sat beside her. He looked at the screen. "See this dip at 4 minutes," she said. "Why does it always dip there?" "Because that's where the hook resolves. And the story has to earn itself," he said. "The audience decides in that 4-minute window whether they're in or they're out. If the next 60 seconds don't give them a reason to stay, they leave." "Yes." She looked at the graph. "So how do you make them stay?" "You give them someone to root for," he said. "That's all it ever is. You find the person inside the story, and you make the audience care what happens to them." She was quiet for a moment. "That's what you were doing with us," she said. He looked at her. "At Meridian," she said. "The whole time. You weren't hiding. You were—" She searched for it. "You were waiting for me to find the person inside the story." He held her gaze. "I was waiting for us to find each other," he said. She looked at the screen. "We found us," she said. "Yeah," he said. "We did." The screen glowed between them. Retention graph view counts the quiet metrics of something that had been built in a basement and reached 10 million people, and outside the oak tree that Olivia had stopped wanting removed. Moved in the morning wind, and the kitchen was warm and full, and exactly the right size for the 2 of them, and a daughter who was upstairs right now writing in a notebook the things her father had taught her without meaning to. Ethan Walker was 40 years old. He had built something invisible until it became real. And the most real thing he had built was not in the analytics. It was here at this table, at this hour, in this kitchen. He had never needed the world to understand him. He had only needed his family not to give up on him. Neither had. But 3 months after the founder conference, Marcus Webb came back to Meridian. This time not for a quarterly review. He came on a Thursday afternoon without announcement and sat down across from Ethan at his desk, with the expression of a man who had waited a decent interval and now had something to say. "The board is asking about succession planning," he said. "I know," Ethan said. "They want to understand your long-term role, whether you're continuing as a silent founder or whether you're taking an active leadership position. Is there a third option?" Marcus looked at him. "I want to stay exactly here," Ethan said, "but with the door open. I don't want to become the face. I don't want a CEO title. I want to keep building from where I am." He paused. "But I want Olivia involved." Marcus was still. "Not as a corporate decision," Ethan said. She's been learning the content side. She understands business development. She has instincts about audience that I trust. He looked at the window. There's a version of this where we do it together. Not as a publicity angle, just practically. She could do the business strategy side. I do the creative infrastructure. Marcus considered this for a long moment. Does she want that? He said. I don't know yet, Ethan said. I'm going to ask. And if she doesn't, then nothing changes, Ethan said. I'm not building this as a condition. I'm asking because she's the right person. If she says no, that's the right answer too. Marcus nodded slowly. You've changed, he said. Have I? You used to build everything alone by design, Marcus said. You used to say the best infrastructure is the kind that doesn't depend on any single person. That's still true, Ethan said, but dependence and partnership aren't the same thing. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Ask her, he said. See what she says. He stood up, picked up his coffee, and left. Ethan sat for a moment. He pulled out his phone. He texted Olivia, come down to 14 when you have a chance. I have something I want to ask you. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, coming now. He put the phone in his pocket. He looked at the window. The city moved past outside traffic buildings, the ordinary scale of the world that had no idea what was happening in this particular room on this particular afternoon. Then the elevator opened and Olivia walked in. She came across the floor and sat in the chair beside his desk. What? She said. He looked at her. I want to tell you something, he said, and then I want to ask you something. She waited. What I built, he said, I built alone because I thought that was necessary. Because I thought the work required isolation to function. Because I was afraid that letting someone in would change what it was. He held her eyes. I was wrong. She said nothing. What I could have built, he said, if I'd had a partner who understood it, I don't know. But I think it would have been more. Not more channels, more real. She looked at him steadily. I want to know if you want to be part of it, he said. Not as a gesture, not as a compensation for what went wrong. Because you're actually the right person, and I should have asked years ago. Olivia was quiet for a moment. The office hummed around them. What would it look like? She said. Business strategy, client development, the things you've been doing upstairs but applied to the whole network instead of one company. That's a large job. Yes, I'd need to understand it properly first. I know. You've been doing that since February. She looked at her hands, then at him. You've been building toward this question for months. Since the basement conversation, he said. Yes, you do that, she said. You see the destination and you just wait for the right moment to build toward it. Yes. She looked at the window, at the city outside. Yes, she said. Yes, what? Yes, I want to be part of it. She looked back at him. But I want it to be real, not a title. Real work. It will be real work, he said. You already know that. She nodded. Then yes. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She looked at him with a half smile that was mostly the eyes. You were scared I'd say no, she said. A little. You faced a $5 million client crisis without flinching, and you were scared of asking your wife a question. Different kind of scary, he said. She stood up. I'm going back upstairs to clear my calendar. She smoothed her blazer. And then we're going to need to have a very long meeting. Tonight, he said. She walked back to the elevator. He watched her go. He turned to his screen. He had a long meeting tonight. He had a lot of work to do. He had a door that was open and a family that knew where to find him, and a daughter who was building something of her own in a notebook upstairs. He had, for the first time in 15 years, exactly the life he'd been building toward. He just hadn't known yet what it was going to look like when it was complete. Now he did. It looked like this. An ordinary Thursday afternoon. A basement door open. A family that could see each other,